Button. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program Council meeting. First item of business will be call to order and the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Oops. All right. First item of business is the agenda revisions. Do we have anything, Dwayne? I think I heard to add 9G.
Yeah, we have a couple of new appointments in the management board, and we're recommending moving it to 9G, new business.
Is that okay with the council? Everyone okay? All right, we'll go ahead and make that adjustment. All right. Any other revisions? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to resolutions, recognition letters, and back to you, Dwayne.
Mr. Chair, we have one award, the chairman recognition, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right. In recognition of Kurt Smith, who is past chair, he's an avid waterman. He provided strong leadership, and I can tell you that it was a tough year from all sides, and he managed our meetings very, very well. He also went through the 5-year EPA program evaluation, which is not an easy process. So I'd like to recognize Kurt Smith. And if there's, do we have that trophy that
we have an award, and we'd like you to come down and take a picture.
If the board would join us.
From under there.
Let's go in front here.
Yeah, balance this out a little bit.
Where do you want me to be?
Next to me.
Here, run over here.
Make me look better.
There we go. You good? Congratulations.
Thank you. You did a good job. You're a heck of a guy.
We're going to put your name on it.
Okay, all right.
An original.
All right. Any comments from the board for Kurt? I know that everybody likes to have fast meetings, so yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
So yesterday afternoon, I spent a couple hours with Virginia Barker, who's, in Brevard County. And Brevard County, I see 64 counties. I see what all they do, and the commitment and dedication that Brevard County has to the Indian River Lagoon is really substantial, obviously, with the investment they're making. And Kurt, I'd really appreciate what you've done, not only for Brevard County, but also for the council and the lagoon itself, with everything you've committed to dredging projects, sewering projects, all these things. It's just fantastic, so I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, moving right along, I'd like to recognize Jennifer DeMeo, who's here today from EPA. We appreciate you, and it's nice to see you coming all the way from Atlanta. Is it still cold up there?
Every day's different.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your support. Next item of business will be public comment. I do have one speaker card. That would be Bob Stephen. Come, there you go. Good morning, sir. Welcome back.
Yes, good morning. My name is Bob Stephen. I live at 150 Concha Drive here in Sebastian. Some of you know me. I've been trying to get the city of Sebastian to stop using glyphosate in the backwaters of the city for about 3 years now. Just about a year ago, I was up cleaning my gutters. I think you all know I got real sick. I got the drift from 2 airboats shooting either glyphosate or dicot or something. I got so sick I went into the hospital the next day, and I was in and out of a breathing clinic for 2 days a week. After a year, I finally found a breathing doctor that gave me some sort of medication for $2,000 that got me breathing again without the mucus. The doctor says I need to move away from this creek that I live on because of the glyphosate. The city won't stop spraying. I have pictures before and after. I've invited people to my house, you all. I've invited you to my house so you can see firsthand what it looks like before and after. The glyphosate is shot, and it's devastating. This is a love canal I live on now. And when I first bought the house 3 years ago, they hadn't sprayed in 6 months. It looked nice. There were birds there. There were animals. There were reptiles. We have nothing like that anymore. They're all gone. So I urge you to please try and direct your powers to be to get one of your committees maybe to look into this, see if we can at least curb it. Along with the Audubon Society and the Friends of St. Sebastian River, I've been able to put signs up, offer people signs, no spraying signs, and that's been fairly successful, but they don't spray in front of their house, but they spray down further. Rumor has it they're doing something else now too, but I don't know what that is. So the headwaters of the St. Sebastian River look terrible, and these freshwater creeks all dump into it. And it's just, if you go to the end of Collier Creek, where it dumps off the waterfall there, or the little dam, and goes down into the headwaters, it'll make you sick to your stomach. It's like a picture out of the Love Canal up in New York back 30, 40 years ago. We should stop this. This is ridiculous. This stuff causes muck. The muck is deep, knee-deep or better in our canals. I've got to move away, but thanks for your help.
Thank you very
much. I know
much.
you guys do a lot, so thank you for what you do.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker card is Kelly McGee. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
My name is Kelly McGee, and I am on your Management Board Financial Subcommittee, and I'm here this morning to introduce you all to a wonderful new resource to the Indian River Lagoon community. This is Ms. Margaret Stewart. She is the director for the Center for Earth Jurisprudence, which is a program of Barry University Law School in Orlando, and so I just wanted to introduce her, let you know that she and the center are a great resource for all of your counties, and especially for many of the universities that are within the 5 counties. And so just wanted to extend a welcome to Ms. Margaret Stewart, and thank you for your work, and introduce Ms. Margaret to your staff as well. Thank you very much.
Ms. McGee. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Fielding.
A resource in what manner?
We are a legal advocacy center, and we have a team full of fellows and staff attorneys and students that do legal writing and research. So really, if you ever need any background information on different things or whatever legal issues come up, we would be more than happy to provide any resources for you.
Comments? Okay. Thank you. Welcome. That's all I have in speaker cards. Did I miss anybody? All right, we will close public comment, come back to the board. Next item of business will be the STEM Advisory Committee update. Dr. Jacoby. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Chuck Jacoby. I'm the chair of the STEM Advisory Committee, and I work at the St. Johns River Water Management District. The STEM Advisory Committee met on the 20th of March, a rescheduled meeting, and most of that meeting focused in on looking at phase 1 of the vulnerability assessment. for sea level rise and climate change. There's a phase 2 that should be coming in the next fiscal year. Phase 1 focused in on gathering together the risks. The whole process applies the EPA workbook for gathering information on these risks and then prioritizing them and deciding what actions could be taken and who would take those actions. So phase 1 is pretty much gathering the basis, and phase 2 will be then going forward and trying to define actions for the future. The other major thing is that the STEM Advisory Committee is reviewing the draft Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan with input due by the 16th of April. And this is kind of at the high level. This is more looking at, do we have the right pieces? Is there maybe a better order to put them in? It's trying to keep people from looking for commas and misplaced periods and spelling and things. But we're looking to get some input to get this process rolling. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jacoby. Next item will be the Citizens Advisory Committee. Frank Catino?
Kathy, why don't you do a quick
Okay.
brief? Frank is probably on the river fishing.
He sends his apologies. He couldn't move his schedule around to be here
He
today.
said put another zero in his salary, he'll be here.
That's right. So Citizens Advisory Committee is meeting on Thursday of this week to review the small grants program applications that we received. We got 27 of the applications, all really neat projects, so you'll be hearing about that at our next meeting. But they're going to review we're going to rank them this week. They're going to complete their reviews by Monday. I'm going to rank them and submit that for discussion at their meeting on Thursday. So they'll be going through that and picking the ones that'll go through on Thursday.
Any questions? Hearing none, thank you. Moving right along. Oh, well. Management Board report. Mr. Bob Yulovich.
Someone just threw the anchor out.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Long time no
Mr. Chair.
see.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. All right, so your management board met this past Tuesday at Up to Creek Farms, and is in all cases, it's a dynamic meeting. And I tell you continuously that I am humbled by that group and the constructive and professional and objective discussions that we have. So getting right into it. In regards to your agenda today, there's a couple things that I want to talk about. Is first of all, we did welcome the introduction of new members. Dwayne's already talked about Jennifer DeMeo with EPA. We present to you our endorsement of her membership as a full active board member, a voting member on the management board, and then Jim Sullivan representing Harbor Branch. They were recommended to us. So the board discussed that and voted wholeheartedly to include him as members of the management board. So that's presented to you today. Also, Chris, I believe you have a vacancy for Jim David, so we look at filling that, okay? Also, Stu Glass has now taken over the leadership chair of the Finance Committee, and from the looks of things at the table at the Finance Committee meeting that morning, they had a very dynamic meeting. In fact, they ran a little over, so it's a good sign. Kelly's a member of that, so, in the past, it was kind of wanting to get the momentum going. They clearly have momentum, and the committee did their job of reviewing the budget and everything, and that was presented to the management board, and the management board endorsed that, and that's being presented to you again. Lisa Soda, who's going to talk to you today under 6B on your thing, did a presentation on the report card. And there was a lot of discussion about this, from the philosophicalness of a report card, the goods and the bads associated with that. We talked about that. So some of the things, and I'm saying this up front to you to plant some seeds so when Lisa gets up, you can have some discussion with her. So we talked about the pros and cons of it. and agreed that it still needs to be done. She used the Chesapeake Bay as a model, had one continuous line. We had a lot of discussion about, do we want one number or do we want a regional number? In the favor of the board at the time there was to go with a regional look to be able to better identify and pinpoint. The introduction of land use into the modeling would be helpful. Use of DOs, there's a lot of discussion about the use of DOs as a barometer for the health of the lagoon be included. Whether or not, septic tanks should be included or should be included. And then we talked about, basically, the take-home message was to sustain the development of that report and continuation of it. A lot of discussion got into water quality versus quantity. Meaning, using the habitat of the seagrass, saying there may be more seagrass, but what's the quality of the seagrass? And then, sadly, some of her data has gaps in it. You'll see there's just no instrumentation out there. It's either been decommissioned or, in most cases, it's been decommissioned by budgetary cuts. So the matter there is, if we're going to truly try to do this in a thorough manner, it's hard to do that without instrumentation. And we've had prior discussions here on the value of instrumentation and the continual funding of that. So, that's a message to the primary principals, and that in this case would be St. Johns River Water Management District, perhaps DEP in South Florida, to help in reactivating or commissioning additional data collection. Old business, you're going to hear about, we talked about flushing model, but I understand there's a new, more politically correct term now instead of flushing. Dwayne will probably talk about. We talked about some of the Tetra Tech work and also FDOT bridge design that's going in the graciousness of the port to help us modeling. All right, that was the easy stuff. Okay, the hard stuff, we got into the ranking and discussions about the projects as it's before you today, and a lot of discussion. And I'll venture to say, and I'll be so bold to say, that there's probably very little today that you're either going to talk about or think about that we didn't touch upon. So we gave it a thorough washing of the situation, and I'll just go through some of the key points. In restoration, there were some questions about, well, first from a philosophical decision, despite all these discussions, we still maintain that the process needs to be, the process you have in place, we think needs to be worked on, but you have a process in place, and we don't think it's opportune to derail the train at this point in the process. The other thing is to the message to applicants that perhaps some of them are complacent or not up to the task, but the position of the board and the reviewing group is that we have an expectation of quality applications. And that if you're not up to that task, then you're going to waste your time and our time, and your results will be reflective of the energy that you put into it. So we understand it's fine tuning. So we get into restoration. There was some discussion about are we mixing and matching the correct things in there? Do I want to talk about septic tanks about the same time as I want to talk about shuck and share under the same group? I mean, so is that where I want to be? Also in the future, maybe I want to focus on a specific area. Maybe I want to do oyster bed restoration as a focal point, or maybe I want to do septic tanks as a focal point. So I think when you get into that, you start doing that, then I don't know if that's a good match for restoration. Restoration, when I talk about restoration, and I agree shoreline restoration is applicable, but it's a dirt thing to me. I'm a dirt guy. So if I can do a radial gate retrofit, if I can do side bike stabilization, if I can get in all those types of things, to me that's more into my dirt turning restoration, not at the discount of other things, but perhaps we need to do a subset of it. So this is all part of our cleansing that we're hoping. The other thing comes into, we need to talk about cost benefits. You know, if I have a project that's $50,000 an acre and one it's $100,000 and one it's $150,000 an acre, I need to build that into the decision-making model, okay, so that we could do that, or we need to do that, okay? So our challenge is to make it better and have a sense of a business sense that there's a return on investment. So in the restoration group, we did have a discussion about Tamaka State Park. Some of the participants felt that questioned its application to IRL given its location. There was also counter discussion to that given the simple fact that it was a contributing entity to the lagoon. And after discussion, you know, the focus of the group remained to keep it where it was. So in regards to the restoration, there was, other than the dissension in regards to the placement of Tamaka Park, there was agreement to move forward with the restoration projects. Okay, and I'm taking this in so you understand it, in kind of the things. The science and technology got into a lot of discussion, a lot, and I kind of used the parable with baseball. You know, I'm a Pittsburgh Pirate kid, and you know the Pirates frankly can't compete with the Yankees in the market. Okay, so when you look at some of the players involved down here on the left side of the science and technology, you wonder, you know, they can afford to hire one caller Stanton, okay, and the Pirates can't. So, you know, how do you do this? All right. So the question becomes all right, so what can we do to fix this or look at this in the future? We had a lot of discussion. We talked about shifting things, but we always fell back to the basic premise that the integrity of the process is paramount. That we were not going to derail the train in the middle of the process. We weren't going to get in the position that when you start doing these manipulations, you put yourself at risk for having to redo RFP, you expose yourself to legal things. We put out a document that had stipulations that this board council had previously approved, and we adhered to those stipulations, okay? So it was our position after all this discussion that we're not going to derail the train, but we're going to come here with additional solutions, some which may be increase the percent of match to 50%. Some of them which may be if an applicant has 2 of the top 5 projects, the applicant has to tell you which one is their priority. You know, because if you look at this, there's a dominance of the financials by a certain group. And then the also thing is, you know, we're going to walk the talk. There are some small market players out there that we've talked about getting involved, Bethune-Cookman and Stetson and all that, okay? You know, are we going to give an opportunity for groups like that to compete in the big market? So those are things that we talked about, and we talked at length, okay? And we weren't in lockstep with each other. But again, the paramount message that we bring to you that we had there is the integrity of the process at this point in time. If you want to change the process, please do. But do that with cautionary note that this isn't the time to do it. So we went through each one of the matters, and we approved them. There was some dissension or what's the word? Abstentions, okay? But basically what is presented to you, okay, today, the board approved and is recommending a continual endorsement with all that discussion, okay? This was not, you know, I sit up here sometimes and tell you my proudest moments is when we end in a tie vote. And my proudest moments is when we can sit down and have those types of discussion. Everybody gets to air something, and we do it in a constructive and objective and a minimal subjective manner, okay? And we park everything aside and we say, what's in the best benefit of the lagoon and the positions that we're here to represent. And you know, I'm before you in that mode, not as my personal opinion, but as a representative management board, saying that that is the consensus of your board that you have appointed. That, I believe, is a rather lengthy summarization of a very good meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg.
Questions?
Any comments from the board? Oh, Deb.
Hi, Deb.
Councilwoman, sorry.
Good morning. Thank you. Good comments. It's indeed looking at these and hopefully at a more appropriate time during the agenda, would like to have this further discussion with council and with our executive director on some concerns with this particular process, because it looks like a David and Goliath process. And while indeed we appoint the management board and they're an advisory committee, we here at this council set the direction. So I'd like to have some further discussion on this process going forward next year, how we can strengthen it and perhaps balance the scales, if you will, because it's a very real issue that this is a first year we've really had to address it, and I think this council will have some discussion, hopefully, to strengthen some areas that need to be balanced with that, and possibly look at some existing proposals to see where there may be some overhead, let's use that word, to possibly look at some bubble projects that were right there on the bubble.
A term that, we looked at, we feel very strong that if proposals come in that include salaries and benefits, that's something that's hard to digest.
Well, that in itself isn't just the only indicator, and I don't want to micromanage. I don't want to get specific, from the council position, at least my position, but I do think it's worthy of a discussion on for going forward next year, and even strengthening some weak areas in this process for this year. I will address that at a
We're in total agreement, Deb. When we talked about this, we said we'll package it up and we'll bring it to the council because you are policymakers. Okay, we're advisory. We take that role extremely serious, and you've heard me stand up here and say that, I've told you use us or lose us. So I'm going to, the benefit of being 71 and in the position I am in life is I can tell you what I think, or what we. It's not me, it's the board. What you need to hear. What you do with that information is your prerogative.
And that's so appreciated. And it's a volunteer
What, being 71?
Yes, that too. That too, with all due respect.
No, that's what you get. That's what you get from this board.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And thank you for the time and
You're quite welcome.
All the processes that this went through. I probably had more conversation and phone calls from multiple sources on this particular one. So look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay.
Bernice?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. My office, the league office, is in the USDA lab in Fort Pierce, and there's 40 PhDs and 130 lab techs that are very, very bright. It's the brightest, biggest citrus lab in the world. And with that brain trust, they never agree on anything on greening. Every corner of that building has a complete different philosophy on how to cure our disease that's devastating our industry. And to hear that Bob's committee, which has a lot of bright people, have a consensus is a godsend. And I'm thankful that he's brought forward these recommendations. So I support him.
Thank you. Mr. Fielding?
I don't know that we're looking at the specifics yet. We're not at that point on the agenda, so I don't know that was an appropriate conclusion yet. Second, I think there might have been some misunderstanding that went forth to begin with that caused some of the concerns that now exist. And so I think from my perspective, I will see not just in the future changes, but changes in dealing with what we've got.
You heard my recommendations from the board and your prerogative.
Heard.
All right, thank you for your comments. And
Thanks, Chris.
I'll just share with you that this is an item that needs to have its own process. I'm talking about a workshop, backup, point, counterpoint, all of which this board is ill-prepared to have that discussion here today. But because we have our meetings set up and we've made time throughout the year, any one of our meetings could be a workshop, which would be more appropriate for handling the point, counterpoint. That way this board would be more prepared to respond or to have an opinion on some of the comments made today. So we can talk about that under council
Okay.
reports and then give direction to the staff at that point. Thank you, Mr.
We're
Yulich.
good.
Thank you
Thanks.
to the
Thank
board.
you.
Thank you. Next items are presentations on water quality reports. Back with Dr. Jacoby. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'll probably keep this brief and just kind of skip to the main thing that's been on most people's minds for the northern reaches of the lagoon, and that's the brown tide, which returned to Banana River Lagoon, much as it had been there in 2012 when we had a fairly large fish kill. And that's what people have been trying to address and trying to learn from the 2012 experience. So one of the things we've had was initially weekly phone calls with a range of players, various agencies and other concerned groups, in an effort to try to see what we could do to stay ahead of this as much as possible. There's no simple way to get rid of the brown tide, and a fish kill was definitely potentially in the cards. So, we were carefully watching the dissolved oxygen concentrations in Banana River Lagoon in particular, but also in the northern Indian River Lagoon. And fortunately, the lowest dip we had was the other day, and it got down to 2.09 milligrams per liter, and 2 is that sort of tipping point where a lot of the fish just don't cope if the levels drop below 2 for a long period of time, particularly if it's over the extent that this might happen, because they have nowhere to go. We saw a variety of fish kills in Sykes Creek and some of the areas that were a little more back in the backwaters, but we haven't yet seen the large fish kill. The cold front that went through dropped temperatures a little bit. That helps keep oxygen in the water, and the wind also helps mix oxygen into the water, so we've seen a bit of a rebound, and oxygen levels were rising when I looked this morning. So that's kind of where we've been over the last period. One thing I will tell you is, if people sometimes tell you that the brown tide needs high salinities, well, Banana River Lagoon has the lowest salinity of any of the sensors that we have out there. It's about 22, the others is up around 30, 34. And so it can cope with high salinity and outcompete other phytoplankton at high salinity, but it doesn't need high salinity. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? No, it is disturbing, that's for sure. And from every end of the lagoon, people are concerned. So thank you for the report. Next item will be our new presenter, at least for me anyway, Diane Hughes, Martin County. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Diane Hughes, Martin County Public Works. We have a little bit better report down in our end of the lagoon. Currently, the Lake Okeechobee elevation is 13.53 and falling. About 7 days ago, it was 0.21 feet higher, and about 30 days ago, it was 0.96 feet higher, so it's dropping about a foot in a month right now. Inflows to the lake are 343 CFS. Outflows are around 3,000 CFS. The majority are going south and to the Caloosahatchee River, and we have some small water supply going in from S308 to our C44 basin, but we have no flows coming into the St. Lucie River and estuary at this time. I periodically check the Kilroy devices a couple times a week, and we have good DOs in the area and no elevated chlorophyll A levels at this point in time. The health department and Pterococcus levels are still in the good range for us, and the Florida Oceanographic Society rated the estuary an overall rate of B+ last week. And that's all I have.
Any questions? Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, moving on to 6B, Dr. DeFries.
Mr. Chair, excuse me. I'd like to introduce Dr. Lisa Soto. As many of you remember, gosh, it's way back when we were up at Volusia County, we entertained support for the beginning of a report card that Marine Resources Council was going to undertake. Our contractual commitment to this was on the science side, both the acquisition of data, synthesis of data, and modeling. And so what Dr. Soto today is going to do is to give you, a glimpse of where she is. She has made all her obligations to this contract. Part of that was making a presentation to the management board, making a presentation to you today, and then ultimately a final report to us. And then staff will look to you for some guidance. They have not asked for additional funding for this project as it moves forward. And so staff just wants to get a broader sense of where you see the NEP as it relates to report cards, because that was an issue of discussion on at least 2 occasions. So Dr. Soto, it's all yours.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here to finally be able to present something. I think you're going to be pleased. There's a lot to this. The presentations I've been giving in the past have been very lengthy, going into the science and how we did the methodologies and so on. I don't intend to do that today, but I have that ready. If you have questions on it, I can show you. So just know that there's a lot, and I'm going to try to just spend about 10 minutes and give you really the outcome. So starting with, I couldn't get this to work the other day. I'll just do the arrows. You'll recall that we did an American Assembly back in 2014 where we brought in 100 stakeholders, and there were over 100 priority actions that came out of that. And the number 2 priority action was to do a report card. The Chesapeake Bay report card was available. People took a look at it. They wanted to do something similar here. So that's really what started this whole idea of doing this project. We entered into a contract with the NEP, provided about $70,000, and this is to do the methodologies and really the scientific rigor and data collection. We've collected over nearly 2 million data for water quality, fisheries, habitat, marine mammals, sea turtles, a whole bunch of different kinds of data. We looked at a number of different indicators. We held the science assembly. Some of you were involved with that in January of 2015, and we worked with scientists to figure out what those indicators would be. Oh, I'm going to do it the wrong way again. No, you know what? We're going with the arrows. Chesapeake Bay report card, one of the things that people really liked was this concept of having a line and being able to see incremental change over time. When Bob talked about whether there'd be a single line or a single number assigned to the report card, this is what Chesapeake Bay has done here. What you may not be able to see are the numbers on that line, but when they started their report cards, their score that they gave for the entire bay was a 23, and then over a number of years, it's up to a 32. So it's kind of, the idea is to show that incremental change, that things are getting better, because we know it's going to take a long time for things to get better, and we want the public to see that, yes, it's working, that the hard work we're doing is working. It's just taking a long time. Instead of, we're hearing right now, up in Brevard County, our lagoon tax isn't working because there's a fish kill this year. Well, it's been a year since we started implementing projects. We need to have some measure, some incremental measure to show things are working. It's going to take a long time before the entire system responds. So that's the idea. It's really meant to be a message of hope. It's not meant to be the sad story that we see. No, we're going with the. Okay, so the regions are divided up. There's 10 regions, and the reason that they were divided up really is by the EPA because of their ecological characteristics. And when they have different parameters and different targets, different regulatory targets associated with them. So the 10 regions divide the Mosquito Lagoon, for example, into 3 different areas that have different regulatory targets. So there's the Mosquito Lagoon North, Central, and South. The Banana River Lagoon has its own targets. The North Indian River Lagoon has its own targets. The Central Indian River Lagoon is divided into North and South, and then South Indian River Lagoon is divided into North, Central, and South. So the way we're hearing that we would like to proceed is that each one of these regions would be given a score, and each one of these regions would be given one of those lines, like the Chesapeake Bay, because they are unique. The indicators that were finalized for this first assessment are the ones that you see on the screen here. There are 4 water quality indicators: chlorophyll A, which is a measure of algae, total nitrogen and total phosphorus, which are both nutrients that have to have a certain balance in the lagoon, and turbidity, which is a measure of how clear the water is. The only habitat indicator we're using in year 1 is seagrass. We have, we had to kind of draw the line somewhere for this first report, so we went with indicators that had established targets. We can develop targets for other things in the future and add a lot more health indicators in the future as we proceed. An example of how we set different categories and the range of scores is that we had different targets for these different regions. The one that's on the screen now are the targets for chlorophyll A. And you see that they are set by different agencies, that there are different target values for the different regions. To calculate a score, so I want to let you look at that for a minute. So for Mosquito Lagoon, North, Central, and South, the Mosquito Lagoon targets are set by EPA, and they're measured in geometric means. The North Indian River Lagoon and the Banana River Lagoon, Central IRL, North and South are all set by St. John's, and they're measured in annual medians. And then South Indian River Lagoon is set by South Florida, and those targets are also established as annual medians. We found in the data there wasn't a lot of difference between geometric mean and annual median, but we did compare the actual values with these targets to establish the scores. So establishing the scores was really about just finding the difference between what the target is for each of those regions and what the either geometric mean or the annual median is for those regions, and so by subtracting the actual value from the target, and then separating those into categories according to how those data all parsed out. And then we averaged 4 indicators for the water quality score, and we used the seagrass scores for the habitat score. Seagrass for the habitat score. Okay, so this is what the outcomes look like. This is for Mosquito Lagoon. These are the seagrass scores, habitat score, and the scores would range, in theory, from 0 to 100.
Yes.
Excuse me.
And Mosquito Lagoon, I'm sorry.
Just a minute. Does the council have a copy of this report? Do we have this? Am I missing something? Or is it, did we
I
get a copy of this?
don't think we have a hard copy of this now.
I have not seen this presentation.
Okay.
There's a methodology report that's available that's been submitted to the National History Program. But this is...
Copy of the presentation and get it to everybody.
Thank you.
And get it on the website as well.
It's hot off the press. You're seeing it here live. Mosquito Lagoon North doesn't have seagrass. That's why there's no data. It's not a habitat suitable for seagrass, so there are no seagrass there. Mosquito Lagoon Central, Mosquito Lagoon South, these are the seagrass scores. This covers 20 years of data, actually over 20 years, from 1994 to 2016. And then we provide the color coding so it makes it easier for people to understand and see visually across space and time, how things have changed. Oh, that's just explaining how there's no seagrass habitat there. That's why there's no seagrass score.
Dr. Soto, before you go on, can you go back one slide? Am I seeing a correlation between drought periods and higher scores?
That's a great question. I mean, those are the kinds of questions that we want to come out of this. We want brilliant minds to be thinking, what are the relationships here between changes in habitat quality, changes in water quality, and what was going on in the bigger picture at that point. So it's very possible.
It's interesting because in 2004 we had certainly hurricanes Jean and Francis in the southern lagoon, and it still shows a 94, but that was later in the year, so I don't know if that was a culmination or a median of the entire year in which that number is presented. But clearly you can see in 2010-11 when we had the droughts that there might be a correlation there.
Very possible.
Can you go back to the map just for a second? I just want to be sure where you're cutting central for.
We're cutting central.
Where do
we cut central?
Where is central considered?
It goes from about the Melbourne Causeway down to, is it the inlet?
It's the county.
The county line between Brevard and Indian River?
You're asking where to cut central.
Yeah. Well, and where is central? Excuse me?
Could you come up to the mic,
Central
please?
Indian River Lagoon.
It goes all the way.
This is Dr. Claudia Listopad. She's my colleague.
And we have some maps in there if you want to bring up that are more zoomed in. That might help. So the central ends at the end of Indian River County line.
The north?
Do you want me to go?
South end? Okay.
And does this help? This map? You see the central? It's a little bit more zoomed in, this map.
So it's the Indian River Brevard County line.
So it's Indian River Brevard County line.
Between the central IRL north and
The central IRL south.
Gotcha. Okay. So the north really is a restricted area where there's, except for the Sebastian Inlet, where all that northern half doesn't have any inlets. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, if I could just make a comment for staff, it might be helpful. I know that this is hot off the press, but this might be something that we can kind of get to the board before, even though it is off the press. I understand it. It's an update. It's not the final version, but it's very difficult for some of the board members to kind of take it all in. And
For staff as well. We responded to a request for this meeting to appear based on their timeline.
Okay.
And so I understand totally.
Well, the one thing that we will always continue to do is morph and meld to whatever changes we need to do to be a better board. So, but all right, Dr. Soto, please continue. Thank you.
Okay, these are the habitat scores for the Banana River, the North Indian River Lagoon, Central Indian River Lagoon, North and South, which we now know is Central Indian River Lagoon is divided at the Brevard County Indian River line. And it's over the 22 years of data. And this is the south end of the lagoons. And South Indian River Lagoon, North, Central, and South. And there'll be maps where you can see how that's divided further. There's a lot more. I'm trying to keep this to 10 minutes. But there are a lot of slides at the end. I think this presentation has 116 slides in it, so we can look at all kinds of stuff.
Well, when that comes, we definitely want the book.
If it's of interest. What I want to present is what we've done, how we're presenting it. We worked with the STEM peer review committee to decide, the best way to present data in which forms. And one of the things that came out was that they didn't want to just see the entire region color-coded. We wanted to see the dots, so the sampling sites themselves, so you can get a better understanding of where exactly the data are showing that water quality or habitat quality are better or worse. These are the seagrass transects and their locations. This series of maps right here just divides the lagoon into two areas, so it's a lot coarser scale. Water quality scores. So this is the water quality scores made up of those 4 different indicators that are averaged together, equally weighted. The way it currently stands is 20 years of data. And again, it's showing how things change over time and space. So those questions that come out are things like, why are we seeing these patterns? What happened that year? What changed in 2012 well, we kind of know what happened in 2012. We know what happened in 2016. You start to see, what makes sense, and the brilliant minds out there can go in and start to really look for relationships. Banana River Lagoon, North, Central, Central, North, and South. And then the South Indian River Lagoon. This is what Bob mentioned, that, as we were going through data, we started seeing data points disappearing instead of adding data in the lagoon. So as things are getting worse, there are fewer data being collected, not just with instrumentation, but really that personnel, probably budget cuts at the state level with the recession, resulted in the districts having to make those tough decisions on, where to cut their monitoring programs. And, they did a tremendous job of trying to keep things going, but, some of those sites, and we're going to be doing a gap analysis report also to recommend maybe where areas need to be monitored. Some of the sites that were more recently dropped need to be reestablished. But here in the southernmost end of the South IRL, there are absolutely no water quality data being collected at all. So you see starting in about 2012, we don't have any data, so it just falls off the map. So as more sites are going to be cut, that's going to start to happen. All right, so then again, this is what the maps look like. These maps include some of the sites that have been decommissioned, so to speak, the missing data. And you can see how many sites at the south end of the lagoon are no longer regularly collecting monitoring data. These would have been monthly sites that were monitored every month by a professional going out and collecting samples, sending it to the laboratory. And there's just a large percentage of them have just not been, they've been decommissioned over time. One of the things that we found already is very, very interesting is the difference in water quality scores and habitat scores, and that there's not a clear relationship at all. And it kind of makes you wonder if we're monitoring the right water quality things to assess the health of the lagoon. So this is an interesting question immediately that comes to view, is just this looking at the South Indian River Lagoon, North, Central, and South. You can see that their water quality is relatively good compared to some other areas of the lagoon. but their habitat quality is abysmal. In fact, they have the lowest habitat score in the entire lagoon in the central South Indian River Lagoon. And then there's that south area down by Loxahatchee that there's no water quality data. So the question is, are water quality targets adequately assessing the health of the lagoon? When seagrass is such an important base measurement of lagoon health. If we don't have seagrass, our primary production is off, our habitat is off, everything, the system is not healthy as long as there's no seagrass. So that's all I have in the formal presentation. I need to acknowledge the STEM peer review committee. It did a tremendous amount of work. And we talked to over 100 individuals on the phone begging for their data, talking to them about their data, what are the objectives of your data. And then, but these folks that are on the screen here, we spent a lot of time with getting a better understanding of what the data sets are and what the availability of data are. And of course, we need to thank you for the funds to do all the great scientific rigor, and my colleague, Claudia Listobad, who did all the hard work. I just had to get all the money, which turned out to be easy. This project ended up costing over $200,000, but the community came in, bringing in over $140,000 for the project, really through individual donors and family foundations, showing the desire to see this type of thing. And so we more than matched the grant that we got. That's all I got. I'll be happy to entertain questions. We'll certainly, as soon as this thing is published, we didn't want to publish until we went through this peer review process with the management conference. So you're the final input that we get before we release this thing. So I welcome your
Commissioner Fielding,
questions and
any other
comments.
questions? Sorry.
Thank you. We appreciate it. We know that there were occasions when it was quite tense, and there was a lot of effort made, and we appreciate that. What I would anticipate is that this will be an ongoing iterative type process, so that as we do reports, we will find what we are seeking or what seems to be giving us guidance most effectively, and hopefully we'll be moving towards those things. We want I guess we need to more fully understand what is it we're even trying to accomplish with a report. Two or three things I would see we're hoping, or that we discussed. We're trying to get more community involvement. And this will be a way to get some type of a concise information about, as you started off with, concise information about what is the water quality, what is the habitat quality, what are these kinds of things, so that as individuals see this, they will perhaps have a greater appreciation that it hasn't miraculously flipped, but that we are making progress. So that's something that I'm hoping that we're able to accomplish, and that we evaluate in some way this incremental type change, and that's what I see us doing, but I don't know. Well, we will learn more as we do it, a couple more years or so. I think we'll more closely figure out what we are doing and how closely are we coming to something that is accurately reflective, because it changes overnight. And so it's hard. And none of that was criticisms, and you know that. You know that. But we do want to use the informations and use the techniques so that we might improve on what our end result, what we're trying to accomplish. So we need to understand, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? What is our purpose? So that's what, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. It's open. I think more questions than it's answered so far. It's like there are many more questions now.
Please go ahead.
The task you have before you is tremendously hard, you know, to boil down a visual on lagoon health. And I think I remember in Volusia County, we debated this and what it looks like, and I think I was fairly vocal on the dangers of boiling something down into a grade. It looks like a grade, you know, when you have red, yellow, green. And so I don't know what we approved to fund, but it is just, it's not as precise when you do that, you know, and you pointed it out perfectly yourself with the water quality not necessarily matching the habitat and that kind of stuff. So these estuarine systems are so much more complex than being able to do that. And so it's, you know, I think we need to look very carefully at what we're producing. So, you know, it just makes me a little bit uncomfortable, as you can tell. So I just thought I'd just throw that out there.
Sure. Councilwoman?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the requested action from us is our staff is requesting board discussion direction regarding the next steps related to this project. Are we at the end of this particular funding project, Mr.
Yes, we are, excuse me, we are at the end of the funding. We believe that Lisa and her team will meet the scope of work, which was very specific on our end. So we were a portion of the funding, and what we bought was the data acquisition, data analysis, some of the modeling application, which is all extremely useful. To be honest, there is a lot of debate about both some of the conclusions and the methodologies. And so I'm going to step out on a limb and make a recommendation as your executive director. I think we need to think about where we are going as a national estuary program and to ask the question, is a report card like this the type of scientific delivery of an assessment that we want? And I'll use an example. Or are we looking more towards what some of the NEPs do, and the most recent is Narragansett Bay, where it is a purely technical, large team document. In fact, their recent assessment is 500 pages, where it doesn't really roll up into grades. And so a lot of this is, what is the pleasure of our management conference and council as to how we begin to look at ecosystem assessment, which is part of our mandate under the Clean Water Act as an NEP. So the monitoring, kind of the trend analysis, and I see this, there's a huge amount of work. So I really, commend Lisa and her team. But there are, I think this is a legitimate discussion, and it's one that every NEP has. Do you take it full science? Do you take it to more communication, which is more of a roll-up report card, which then can become advocacy, it can become fundraising, and you kind of lose some of the detail of the complexities of ecosystem function.
Did you have a follow-up?
We don't need to answer that today, but it's an appropriate time to start the discussion.
We have a follow-up.
Well, and because our agenda says it's requested action, we've come to the end of this particular project, I think, and I understand what Mr. Bartlett's saying here and agree with that, and I'm kind of uncomfortable putting a grade on things that change for a lot of reasons here. So my position is I'm going to make a motion that we just let this particular contract complete itself and then see where the board, this council, wants to go in the future. But did we say there's 200,000 on this and then another 130 to get to where we are now on this report card? Is that accurate?
That's
so we
right.
have 330,000.
No, the total was about 200.
Totals,
You
okay.
We raised 130 on our end.
So
That
I'm
was
not
not
sure.
all ours, just for the record. We only have a small portion of that. Frank, do you have the number?
70.
70,000?
Well, just generically, I'm not sure that investing in a report card that's going to change, and I agree. I think we need to look at more scientific data. I support, thank you for all you did and you're doing. I think I would support just completing this particular task and then seeing where this council wants to go forward in reporting. And I agree with our executive director and his thoughts, and maybe you can explain at another time a little further, but that's my position on this.
You use the word motion, but I would like to ask you to, if you were going to make a motion, to hold off for a minute till all board members would have a...
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Fielding?
I would see it totally the opposite of that. Our objective is to try to get information out to the public so that the public might have a deeper, more complete perception of what the situation is, because not only will we then get political support, usually, but not only will we get political support, but the public is the one that's contributing to the problem. So when we have grass that's going into the ditches, that's going into the canals, that's going into the lagoon or estuary or whatever, that organic becomes ammonia very quickly. So that's converted into they call them nutrients, I call them contaminants. So it's converted into a contaminant. And who thinks, well, it's just the grass, I just mowed the grass and I just sort of sweep it off into here and it goes in the storm drain. And that's part of the problem. So if we don't have buy-in from our communities as to what can I do as a homeowner or as a property, whatever, what can I do, then we're not going to solve this thing. We're going to be out on our own whistling somewhere. So we've got to have, in my strong view, we've got to have means of conveying information to the public that they can understand, that they individually can understand, so that as we are taking certain actions, we might be restricted. We might restrict ourselves as we empty the oil out of our car and let it just run wherever and then squirt it off of the pavement so that it then just runs. So we might take individual actions that will be beneficial to the lagoon. So we may, this is the first year of a very difficult trying to come to some resolution of where, how to measure, what areas to lump together, and we probably won't have it for a couple of years sorted out. But if we just draw back and don't do anything, we'll never have it. And so the public has said to us, we are interested in this information, so much so that we will give money to the group that's trying to pull this together. So I strongly support that we continue to do this, because our objective is water quality in the lagoon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, I would like to weigh in on that also. The Indian River Lagoon is sick from top to bottom. And it's sick for a lot of different reasons. Some areas at the south have problems that the middle don't have, and the middle has problems that the top of the system doesn't have. And I think in a report like this is extremely important for us, because we have to know as we move forward what's working and what isn't working. And the only way we're going to know that is to have some kind of data. So I think that this report is extremely important for a baseline, if nothing else. And as we go forward, reports like this would help us know that we're making progress in one area or we're not making progress. And if we're not making progress, what do we have to do to get there? And if we are making progress, what else can we do to make this better and get us where we want to go quicker or more quickly? So that's my thought on that.
Commissioner Barton?
So, I just want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood, because we know the lagoon has issues. We have to communicate to the public the lagoon has issues. We need to make sure that they know the seagrass has died off. We need to make sure they know our nutrients getting into the lagoon are too high. You know, all those things have to be communicated. I just think we have to be very careful on how we communicate it so that the right decisions that people who read it can be made. You know, and so there's, when you look at seagrass, a seagrass measure, you know, it's good to have. You know, you can say where we are with seagrass. The Chesapeake Bay one is a very good representation of that. And so I just think there has to be a lot of thought in what does this look like, what does it say, and how are we going to react? Because it's not always water quality. You know, a lot of people like to run towards water quality, but there's hydrologic issues, there's habitat issues, there's, you know, just what we've done to the lagoon. So there's just so many variables that go into the health of the lagoon that it just merits being careful about how you present it. But Commissioner Fielding is right. The public needs to know. They need to know how they're impacting. So I just don't want to be misunderstood. It's just that we got to make sure that whatever information we produce, people can make the right decisions with. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. I'm going to try, did you have a comment, Commissioner? Please, sorry.
Excuse me, and I would agree with those statements. I think there's so many different variables that go into the situation affecting the lagoon that we need to be very careful how we as an NEP are presenting that information, or what we are partnering with and how we present that information, because we can create misinformation by presenting things the wrong way. I think our role is to support our organizations and organizations that are doing other things in the community, and then to use our funding in a more pointed way to address specific issues that we want to address and prioritize. And I think this is part of that bigger conversation that will probably come about when we start talking about the grants and things like that. I appreciate that we were part of this and that there's not kind of a baseline, but I don't necessarily feel that this is something we need to own and produce on a regular basis. I think if we're supporting groups that are doing that, and that information is out there for people to use for advocacy or fundraising purposes or whatnot, that's great. But I see our role as a little bit bigger and more structured and more pointed in what we're doing and how we're spending that money. So I do think this is a great tool, and I know a lot of work went into it, and I've seen Lisa's presentation at a different meeting. It was great, and I think it brings up a lot of good conversations and gets people talking. So I'm glad we did it, but again, that's just kind of, I think we as a group, as an NEP, need to be very careful about what information and how we're putting it out there, because it bears some weight on our perception in this region and in this issue.
Thank you. Commissioner Bornick, sorry.
Yeah, I spent the last few days in a fixed-wing airplane flying the state, and I just flew with some people that have a lot of land. They wanted to show me the growth. We flew at about 800 feet. We flew down the west coast from Fort Myers to Bonita Springs and across Lake O to roughly North Palm Beach, all the way up to the Brevard County line. And we all drive the roads and we don't really see the growth that's happening to the state. It is growing phenomenally. And there are areas, I as a kid just can't believe our rooftops now that you just don't see off I-95 or off of 192 or State Road 60. It is incredible what's happening to our state so fast, and most of the people want to live along the Indian River Lagoon. And I'm so glad we have, as a council, and this has gotten started, to take the big step into saving this lagoon. And I'm a turn dirt guy. I want to use our assets and our knowledge and move forward and do the best we can on limiting the pollution and delivering better water to this lagoon as soon as we can, because that view I had this week, and I thought I know this state, because in agriculture you drive these roads hard. I drive and put on 60,000 miles a year on my company vehicle. My last car had 320,000 miles at the Jeep dealer in Vero, and they wouldn't let me drive it anymore. they said, Mr. Borden, you got to get out of this car. I mean, that's how hard and how long we go, and the view I just got just shocked me. And so I agree, we need to use our assets and our direction as best we can, as quickly as we can, because time is ticking with this lagoon, and the land and the delivery of the kidneys of this lagoon need to be held in abeyance and utilized as fast and as hard as we can, because the open land is the kidneys. And if you just get a view from up above and see the brown water coming in from the urban areas, it just makes you sick. So I just want to use what we do have the right way and as fast as we can. Thank you.
Hey, one more time, Mr. Fielding.
I'm not sure what I would draw from that, Doug. I don't know which way that went, but I'm going to make them, because if we're spending $70,000 and people are coming up with another doubling that in order to help get information out to the general public, I think that's a good use of our funds, where we've through what was done in transforming what this was, which was a county collaborative. That's what it was. And we transformed that into this group. By doing that, we got money. That was the reason we did it. So we got money, and we got money from the governor. And then as we became an IRL, we got money, federal money. So we got money. That's small, and we're not talking about a project. Lisa's not here and asking for whatever she's asking money at the moment. Well, she wouldn't turn it down, I guess. But what I think we're trying to do is say this has utility, that it does reach towards helping us deal with these problems, and because we are enlisting the support of communities. We're not going to just try to get DEP to go off here and do this, or South Florida go do that, or St. John's to do that. But we are trying to make available information to the general population. Here's what all of us can do. That's what this thing is about. What can we all do? So we are transforming our efforts from a very focused agency type thing to one where we're reaching out to the general population, and we're encouraging the general population to start taking steps that are going to help us deal with the IRL problem. So I move that we...
Commissioner, if you could hold off on a motion. I'd like to take a few moments. I haven't had a chance to speak, and that's my own fault, but I want to kind of take together, the comments that I've heard and kind of bring it all together. Pros and cons. I heard that from the management committee. What are the pros and cons? I see that the staff is asking for the board direction, discussion, and regarding the next steps. So this is a very good discussion. Again, pros and cons of that were there. Full disclosure, I'm not a scientist, and I never will be. But in listening to the conversation, what has been collected are data sets. Data sets are about cause and effect. And as stated in your presentation, you said no, but something has to happen.
I don't think cause is something science proves very well.
Okay.
I don't think data necessarily establishes cause.
But let me share my thought process, and I've heard about development, and I heard from the management committee that do we want to talk about development? Do we want to talk about land use? Everything that is going into the lagoon is coming from somewhere else, the uplands. Development certainly is a part of the cause. How that is managed, stormwater upland, is part of the cause. Where it ends up is the result of whatever happens when it reaches the lagoon. So, in the data that you've provided so far, you have different segments. You have water quality and you have habitat. I suspect, and again, I'm not a scientist, but as drought, what is the input in the regions at what period of time? That data collection is also certain. It can be found. Air temperature, water temperature can be found. What are the land use components in each of the regions of the lagoon? Meaning that if a DRI comes into a development of regional impact comes in, 5,000 rooftops, what is their process to hold water on site and never discharge, or to discharge at some point? So that's a collection of information I think is very important for understanding what is the impact of what's going into the lagoon and from where. Mr. Bornick was very clear to say there is a lot of land out west that is not being utilized. And if we're going to move into that direction of high density, then our land use components that each of the commissioners sits upon and has input should change. St. Lucie County has 25-year, 3-day storms. We're seeing 100-year storms every year. So do we begin to develop the systemic component in our local governments to change that input? Because and we can do the science of nutrient loading, we can do the science of the seagrass, but until we understand where the input is coming from and how much of that is causing the problem, or reduce it completely, we've seen very clearly that in a drought year, the lagoon does so much better. There's a reason for it, because we're not inputting the contaminants, as Commissioner Fielding likes to say. So that's why I'm saying, in looking at this first blush of this report, and I would respectfully disagree that this can't be utilized more fully going forward. I think that the $70,000 that was invested by the NEP was money well worth it, especially if you double the public support. Hearing that what we are trying to accomplish is to garner public support, garner public education, and we do education grants. All of that comes together when it comes time to go to the state or federal government to help us in exponentially using our dollars. So I would suggest, and again, we can have this conversation. I heard two options for a motion, but I would ask you to reconsider, and staff will have some input after my lengthy comments on where to go with this next. But I think there's still more that needs to be added to this data set that will actually give us a better picture as to what does it mean. And largely land use upstream, what are the components thereof, what is the air temperature, water temperatures in the time periods in which you have these components, whether it's a number or whether it's a color code. That I think is going to be important to understanding the report. Now we've seen that the Chesapeake Bay was very good about having their progress reports, and that has been very successful. We've seen the success there, we've seen the success in Tampa Bay. So reinventing the wheel and going away from something that we know has had some success seems almost unreasonable. So that said, I think, and I'm going to listen to Dr. DeFries as to direction, but I'm contemplating going forward with the data that we've collected so far and seeing another version of this come back with a more lengthy and more, again, I'll use the word cause and effect. You can be the scientist and tell me how that should be stated. But
the relationships.
Dr. DeFries.
Mr. Chair, I don't know that we need a motion on this. Part of this contract, some of the tasks were to present to the management board, and that was done today in advance of this final report. The contract actually would bring that final report back to you, and you would have an opportunity to either adopt or not adopt based on your comfort zone on those final report. Am I correct? I mean, that's your understanding, because that's what we've got in our contract. And so your advice is not just to MRC, but it is also useful to staff, because I see a convergence, and we're in that transition to about to have a new revised CCMP. You know, there are a couple of ways we could go on how we want to do ecosystem health assessment. This is one way. This is more in that roll-up to communication to citizenry. And then there are the more technical ways. Some estuaries do both. Some estuaries allow a nonprofit to independently do a report card. We don't need to make that decision today, but I think this discussion is important both for Lisa and her team to move forward to that final report. She hasn't asked us for any additional dollars. I'm comfortable, having watched the process. While the scientists may be in some disagreement about, you know, some of the methodologies, the fact is we have seeded money in that made it possible for this activity to move forward. And I may be wrong on this. I think you would have raised really good private sector dollars, but our participation clearly helped MRC get those additional private dollars by our endorsement. It was almost 2 years ago. So my recommendation just as staff is let's wait for the final report. You have advised both me as I'm looking at the CCMP and, you know, an MRC and her team about some areas of interest and concern, and then we wait for the final report and we'll bring it back to you.
Kathy?
Yeah, I'm really the only one who hasn't weighed in on this, and to be perfectly honest, it's because I really don't know what to say. I agree with some things, I disagree with some things, so I guess the final, you know, my final conclusion is I don't have enough information. So that's, you know, I'm just looking for a little bit more, that's all.
Okay, Commissioner? Come back to you, Mr.
I have a quick question. At the end of the day, is this going to be our report card? Is this MRC's report card? How does that work? And where do we have the opportunity to suggest changes, and who kind of owns that information and what is done with it?
You know, I think that is a concern that goes all the way back to our earlier discussions on this, that, you know, because we are a partial funder of just the science component, I would say that this report card is owned by MRC. They are the developer of it. We have invested, we provided seed money to help them get there, but this is not our report unless you choose and our management conference chooses, you know, to make us a partner in that report. So we have invested in the science. And so I think it's an important question.
I can appreciate your statement. I know that during the, I don't know, 300 or 400 meetings we've been through, whether it was the county collaborative or this iteration, open source information. We made it very clear whether it's coming from FDEP, South Florida, St. John's, each county. We're all investors in anything we support, and so open source information is what we very clearly stated, that we're not keeping our data to ourselves. We're sharing it so that other people can use the monies that are already invested, because that's the return on the investment for the community, the taxpayers, and anybody else associated with this. So whether we put our name on it or whether it's the data that we're looking at and using, it's open source as far as I'm concerned, and we've made that clear many, 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 many times.
I guess my question is more towards the fact of if we want to see changes made in the way that in the data sets and the way they're collected and those numbers are crunched, do we have the ability to do that? Or is this, you know, the Marine Resource Council's process and information, and they're kind of tied to how that? Because I hear us trying to make suggestions of what we want to see back, but I need to understand where we have the ability to do that or not.
Can I respond?
Please, Dr. Sim.
So as far as the NEP Management Conference, you already have. The STEM Peer Review Committee was involved in every step of which data we should collect, what quality the data should be, you know, how should we quality assure those data in the data set, what methods we would use, which targets we needed to use, which are annual targets. I mean, we would love to, how many colleges, I would love fine scale measurements to see variations over time. We don't have fine scale targets. We can't see, I mean, there are huge seasonal variations in a year of data. We've seen them. We've seen trends over 20 years happen. It's been a beautiful scientific experience for me. But our targets, our regulatory targets are annual. So even if you try to do your own, how are you going to do it any finer scale when you don't have regulatory targets that are any finer scale? You're going to make up your own seasonal targets and go through that process? I mean, how do you make it more fine scale? We would like to have it more fine scale also. So it's been vetted. I think the only, if there was any, and I didn't know there was a lot of discrepancy among the STEM regarding the methodologies. There was one discussion at one point between how to standardize the score, whether it should be a -1 to 1 versus a 0 to 100. But other than that, I thought everybody was pretty much in agreement. So, I mean, it has been vetted through a scientific review team that gave us really good quality input on how we should proceed this first year. And then the second, I mean, where we were headed is land use. We want to put the land use layers, which would be a lot of work, because most of them have to be digitized, overlay this. Watch land use change over time, watch water quality respond. I mean, that adds that additional relationship and flows and measures, you know? We haven't even gone up the tribs. We ran out of money. We wanted to go up the tributaries. What's coming down the Sebastian that's making that color happen? What's up that edge of the Sebastian versus that edge of the Sebastian? Like I said, I mean, this opened up more questions than it answered. So, you know, we've got some great ideas of where we want to go in the future, and the next one was absolutely land use. So, yeah, I mean, you've had an opportunity. I mean, your scientific experts have had provided great input on this.
Mr. Chair. So I guess then, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think I may have the answer to the question as it's, at least as it's drafted in the scope of work in the contract. And the contract provides for 3 of these public meetings, one to the STEM, one to the management board, but also one to this board, to hear the progress and the methodologies. And again, it says insights and acceptance of those methodologies. So I guess from my perspective, I think that the scope of work called for this type of dialogue and input that you're having, and for you to give that. I presume that was intended for today, and that's why it's being presented today. And so I guess maybe there needs to be a discussion about whether you're able to do that today or in a position to do that today. But that's what the contract does describe. And then ultimately, there would be a final methodology report. That final report hasn't come out yet. That would be up for adoption by this board. And I think, you know, just from a governance standpoint, obviously the point is you want to express your concerns so that you're not in a position that you have to vote down or vote in opposition to that report. So I think that's what you're hearing today, is that there are some issues that they would like to raise so that when it ultimately comes back to you, you'd be in a position to have a favorable result.
And if I could, you know, I think that, you know, what we're looking at is an update, and we don't have the final, and I've heard that from another board member. And so this is an interim step, and I think it needs to go back. And any grantee that takes and accepts our grant money will accept our comments, or they won't get funded the next time around, I suspect. So I think that that's your leverage here on the board, as to determine whether or not our input is valid or not. And Commissioner Smith, I know that you asked me to jump in, and I forgot about you, so please forgive me. Sorry. Did you want to?
I just wanted to reiterate that I think that the report's extremely important, whether it comes from you or someone else. We need to keep track of where we are, where we've been, where we're going. I can only point to our county board meeting this past Tuesday. Dr. DeFries was there. As you all know, we passed a half-cent sales tax in 2016. It was estimated that we were going to generate about $30 million a year from that sales tax, and that would be used exclusively to clean up the lagoon. And thankfully, the first 12 months reporting is in, and we've raised $42 million. But, and here's the but, we've got people already thinking that we should have finished product. We should be able to see progress. We should be able to tell that this is being done and this is better, and how come we're still having a fish kill? And without data, you're getting involved with emotion, because that's what we saw Tuesday night. It was all about emotion, and it was largely the fishing captains, because they're out there every day and they don't see change. Well, you know, we've only been at it 12 months and we haven't done that many projects yet. So to have data to at least maybe overcome some of that emotion is extremely important, particularly going forward.
Well, at this point, I think we've had a really good, fervent discussion. I think that what I've heard on each side is kind of like right down the middle. I think it needs to go back for its final report and brought back. Additional questions from board members can be asked of you at any time, I suppose. And I did talk about the workshop that I think is going to be important to continue some of this conversation as well, as to process and input and so on. So if the board's okay, I think that we could, Commissioner Fielding?
Let me just ask Dr. DeFries, please. It's my understanding that they have come forward with the information that meets the requirements. Tell it, because what I'm concerned about is that here we might be unilaterally imposing additional requirements that are going to cost hours and work and stuff, and where's the money coming from? That's really, I haven't figured that out yet, so please.
No, at this point, MRC is in full compliance with our scope of work and the portion of this project that we have funded. There's a couple additional steps. So the methodology report we have, but that methodology report is really detailed, and it's above my pay grade because I am not an ecosystem modeler. And so we have been engaged in this process. I think when you see that final report and the methodology report, then the discussion will be, whether you feel comfortable to adopt or not adopt. Very important to note, MRC has not come back to us for funding, and they're anticipating to do this annually still.
Yes.
So they want to put this report out annually. And so the question was, what do we own? We own the data, the methodology. We have access to that data, so at the end of this contract, we will have access to all that data. And should MRC come back to funding for this, from the council, we will bring that to you, but there's no indication at this moment that they're anticipating that next year. So our portion of this is really just having seed funded their ability to do the science, but they are in compliance with contracts so far.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Are you tired yet from standing? We're going to
No,
let
I'm
you.
happy to address any questions or.
We appreciate your presentation, and we look forward to the final report and the methodology.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item is a consent agenda. Is there any item pull for separate vote or a motion?
Only one item.
Pardon me, sir?
I think there's only one item.
So approval of the January 12th minutes. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion is second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Old business, renewal of the CCMP. Frank, come on in.
Good morning, board members. Item 8A, contract renewal for CCMP development support, is what I would call a housekeeping item. This contract renewal is approved previously by the board in the fiscal year 17-18 business plan. Funds were identified and approved in the fiscal year 17-18 budget and still exist. We are required under our procurement guidelines to bring any contract in excess of $25,000 to this board for approval. And until today, that had not been done. So this is required in order for us to move forward on the previously approved action, and would request your motion to approve contract renewal for CCMP development and technical support.
Kathy, is this supposed to be up here, or is it? We have the consent. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Never mind. Commissioner Fielding.
I think what we're doing this time and the efforts that are being made by staff on the CCMP, which are different, but they are different in the extent that it's going to allow us to have a greater awareness of the overall plan and the interaction of the various elements of that plan as we then take these components and as we move towards restoration of the lagoon. So I think who are at Tetra Tech, these folks are helping us accomplish this, and it's going to make us as an NEP much more effective than has been true in the past. So I totally support and move to accept.
Thank you. Is that a motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Dr. DeFreeze, progress report, please.
This will be very brief. I just wanted to give you a sense of the timeline. We're going to try to get this draft input from the STEM AC members, as you heard, mid-May. We are on a fast track compared to any NEP in the nation. They usually take 2.5 years to do this. We're going to try to do it this year, so 12 months. So the plan is to get you a draft, both management board, council, entire conference, somewhere in that late May, early June timeframe, so you have ample time to kind of review where we are in that draft format, bring it to you and to the conference for consideration in the June-July meetings. And then based on your comments in June and July, that we would go on the street, we would make the revisions that you see early on, and then August, September, October, be vetting this document with our partners, with the leagues of cities, you know, anybody who will listen and anybody who wants to debate, including the citizenry, come to you in October, hopefully, with a final draft CCMP that I can bring, you know, through the EPA, put it on October, November, December framework for a formal 60-day public comment period, with the hope that we would be in front of you in the first quarter of 2019 for adoption of our revised CCMP. There are two reasons I think that timeline is important. Number one, we're already doing projects, and we have to get the planning caught up with the projects. But number two, and I'm sure we'll talk about this maybe later, you know, we have been trying to get additional funding, both federal and state. And having this CCMP revised and adopted, I think gives us a foothold in making a case for need, including what is becoming a pretty robust list of unfunded projects that Tetra Tech. So that's my report, and stay tuned.
Okay. Any questions? Great. Thank you very much. Moving on to new business, the RFP for restoration projects, proposal scores and funding. Frank just stepped out. Do you want to?
I'm going to just set this up really quickly until Frank comes back. We're going to address this 9A through F in a different way than we did last year. We're going to take each of those categories individually. I know there's going to be quite a bit of discussion. There was in the management board meeting. And then each one of those will have two motions in order to move forward, should you choose, or if you modify, should you choose to modify, we will respond accordingly. Next slide. The EPA work plan is going to be important to this, and just so you know, the only portion of this that's time sensitive is getting this proposal to the EPA on or before June 1st. The process that we used this year was advised by your input and the management board input and our other advisory councils, and so all 14 recommendations last year were implemented in this process. And it's clear from the discussions in the management board and here earlier that, you know, we have some additional revisions to make to get this to where we want it to be. And I am a big advocate for continual improvement, and so we should be doing this every year. Next slide. And I'd be remiss not to thank those folks who volunteered on these review committees. This is not an easy job. 66 proposals, you know, full ranking and review. And so in both the restoration, science, and engagement, we had 582 score sheets that had to be, you know, synthesized and put into this ranking order. And so I just want to thank our volunteers. This is one of the, we have a lot of heavy lifting with our management conference, but this one is real work that takes days to complete. So for everybody on this list, we deeply appreciate your time. Next slide. And what I'm going to do is turn this over to Frank to walk you through where we are, and then we will deliberate and make motions as we go, or make revisions as you so choose. Frank?
Thank you. And agenda item 9A. What I'm going to be asking for is a response to our RFP 2018-01, in which these are what we would typically call our restoration projects. We had 24 projects that were proposed. 8 of the top-ranked projects are being recommended for funding. The total of those 8 projects for funding comes out to a little over $7.2 million worth of efforts in the lagoon, and the funding from the council is about $1.07 million to these projects. On the slide in front of you and in your advanced agenda were the full ranked list of the restoration projects as they were scored by the review teams. We have enough funding to go to the top 8 of those ranked restoration projects. And further into the ranking sheet shows how deep additional projects that met that bar that were eligible for funding. Additionally, further down in the score sheet are the projects that came below the funding request line based on the scores. So even if we had enough funding to go that deep, based on guidance from this board during our last RFP process, they would not be considered for funding. So at this time, I would request that for 2 things. One, a motion to accept the management board's recommendation for the final ranked list of proposals, and then a second motion to accept the management board recommendation to fund the top 8 proposals contingent and consistent with budget authority, and to authorize staff to negotiate and enter into contracts with those applicants.
So moved twice.
We have a motion. Is there a second for conversation? Commissioner Adams?
I didn't hear what was said.
It was a motion to accept, and then a second in conversation.
Discussion,
Yeah.
Me.
Commissioner Fielding, you.
Yes, please. So you've asked for 2 motions. We've got some that you just showed, the restoration. That's what we're being asked to take action on the restoration.
Yes, Commissioner.
Not
just on
the whole sheet of all of them.
Just this particular RFP for
Okay.
restoration.
So for the restoration, those that have been suggested up to your Brevard Zoo is the last one, I think, was the one you had. But then you have the other 3 that also would meet the criteria, but it was just the money that was allocated. Now, as a observation, best I know, we did not divvy up the pot. This got divvied up otherwise. I don't remember anything about divvying up the pot so that there was $1 million, however much was going to go in this pot and whatever was going to go. I don't remember doing that at all. Maybe that happened. I just don't remember that.
As part of the conversation, it was the amounts of the projects and their criteria and the management board discussions. And Board Member Martina, you sit on that management board.
Yes, I do.
You want to share?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the process. Is that okay?
Sure.
I was one of the reviewers, and I've been reviewing projects for quite a while. And first and foremost, I must say staff did a really great job with the applications this year. And it really wasn't their fault. The applications were very poor. They were poorly written. And one of the first things I do when I review projects is I make myself a matrix to try to take the bias out of, because I know some projects more than I know other projects, and I don't want to be biased, so I make a matrix, and it's really based on what they write in their applications. And they were extremely poor. And it wasn't staff's fault. They had a mandatory meeting to tell them about the grant application. So, you know, there needs to be more education on how important it is now that these applications are really written correctly, because it was very difficult. So with that being said, the other thing that I did have a little bit of a problem is that I did the restoration projects, and as Bob mentioned, you know, the restoration was all the way from oyster restoration to septic to sewer to stormwater retrofit. It's really not apples and apples. There was an awful lot of points provided for outreach, where oyster restoration, you know, shuck and share has a lot of outreach, but, you know, stormwater retrofit, septic to sewer, not so much. So those projects lost a lot of points because of that. And was that fair? You know, I'm not really sure it was. I would really like to see cost-benefit ratios. Again, it was just an example, but we have a lot of oyster restoration applications that come in. Some groups can do it for $25,000 an acre. Other groups, it's $100,000 an acre. You know, what the heck? Because, you know, usually everything is free. And with that being said, what they're asking us for money for is to fund staff. And I have a big, big problem with that. You know, I understand that it's difficult for these organizations, but that is not sustainable to have a grant fund your staff person to do something. I would like to see something in the application that says we will pay a percentage of actual costs incurred to complete the project, so that we can, you know, so we're not paying somebody's salary, their benefits, their vacation, et cetera. I also think that it would help, and this would help with the science and technology, is that, you know, you get extra points if you have a partnership, because that's becoming very, well, all the grants are very competitive, but, you know, with the lagoon, it spans multiple counties. We should be working together to do these projects, not just my little project and then my little project down here. And then, you know, there's a lot of little minutia things that I'm not going to go into, but I do really want to caution the council on attempting to derail the process that we have in front of us today, because it has been vetted by a lot of people scoring. You know, are there problems with it? Yes, but if you start derailing that process, then every applicant on that list has cause to question it. So I'm just asking you to caution.
Commissioner Fielding and
I think it would be useful, not this moment, but I think it may be at next meeting, for us to have an agenda item so that we could deal with construction of the application form, because there are, Kathy's mentioned some things, there are various ideas of what we might want to have included in the application and the flow. So if we might suggest that we have an agenda item, so that would give us that opportunity.
Commissioner Denny? Councilwoman?
Yeah, thank you. Or just Deb, that's okay too. Thank you. Well, I guess I'm going to have to touch something here, a red flag that I didn't consider before sitting down here. And maybe going forward, I guess if we want to talk process and keep state of process, my concern is to have a voting member of the council on the management board and a reviewer of the very applications. I don't know about you commissioners, but in my position as a council member, we don't cross the line from policy to day-to-day activities to keep that clean hands approach with the process and with voting and information going forward. So I don't know that we've ever been in this position or it's been an issue before. We've had to address it publicly. But maybe going forward, we need as a council to say, if we're going to, because we're the final vote. I mean, yes, we have advisory boards, and we appreciate that, and I'm not overriding that. That's not what I'm saying. And they're appointed, they're appointed by us. The Management Advisory Board is appointed by us, but we are the electeds. We are the ones appointed in this position with a fiduciary responsibility. So I'm extremely uncomfortable with anybody that votes at this level that has direct impact on the scoring of the projects at the management board level. I think we need to keep very realistic distance between what we do here in this conversation here and what happens at the board in reviewing these projects going forward, very genuinely. I think it's an unfair advantage, and I'm extremely uncomfortable with this. And I'm going to take that a little further later, maybe under board member comments. We talk about this going forward for next year, what these parameters are. But at the same time, on these restoration projects, I mean, if you want to talk about salaries and some of these other projects, do we want to look at too? And we can do this. We have this authority to look at some of these others. Could we direct staff maybe to go back and even look at some of these bigger projects to see if there's some, I don't know what word you want to use, Mr. DeFries, wiggle room or squeeze room, but we do have those two projects that are on the bubble, number 8 and number 9, that I would like us to look at too, and maybe we look at going forward, the workshop, Mr. Chair. That's the time.
That's the
I don't want to get into
commentary
the
I
weeds.
have today.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's the workshop. That's what we need to discuss in greater depth with all of these issues. But is it possible we could go back and look at some of this? Is that even a possibility?
Actually, we competitively contract on all of these. Last year, we didn't maybe squeeze as much as we did, but the first year, we actually picked up several projects in addition. You know, these are proposals, and we are not in contract, and scope of works have not been, fully detailed. And so the answer is yes, that we can, as we move, if you give us authority to begin negotiation on that ranked and funded list, we can negotiate those with vigor, come back to you in the July framework with not only the dollars that we can negotiate in excess of what was proposed, but we are anticipating some cash forward dollars post-audit. We don't want to speculate on what that might be at this time, so I believe that we will have some financial capacity in July that we currently, don't have right now.
Board Member Bartlett, I'm sorry.
Just a follow-up question. Is any of this time sensitive?
The most important time-sensitive component is the EPA work plan. We have to submit a proposal on or before June 1. We like going in early because there's some advantage to being early in the review process. That will tie up $600,000 of our budget. And, that is a time-sensitive and a fairly, large amount of work for staff.
Board Member Bartlett, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I apologize, but I do have to get to Orlando by 1 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and bug out. But before I go, this is probably the most critical thing on the agenda, and I appreciate Mr. Yulovich's comments and the deliberation that everyone did on these projects, and I just personally have to rely on that deliberation because as I read the projects, I did my own, and I'm like, wait a second, there's a whole team of folks. So I'm supportive of the motions. Not that my vote will count since I'm leaving. But if you don't mind, I want to make a closing comment, and as I would normally do at the end. And I just want to commend Volusia County for this week having gone through the process of adopting a restoration plan for Mosquito Lagoon. We've done that a lot at the department, and I know how hard it is. 4 years. Yes, 4 years. And I just, for a local government to step up and say, we're going to take this, we're going to do it, and we're going to adopt it and send it to us for approval. is just a tremendous lift, and I can, congratulate you. There's a lot of debate, but you've got projects lined up, you've got investments lined up, so it's a great effort, and I commend you for that. Thank you.
Commissioner Fielding had a question, Mr. Bartlett.
Before you run off,
Okay.
because we've got a request for the Shoreline University of Central Florida. And I know we deal with, you've got a couple ladies down that we work with on shorelines all the time. Shorelines, they're not a secret. It's not brand new science. It's just implementing. So where we were looking, and where we might can go, there are a couple of projects in the science and innovation that maybe those monies could be used back in the other category. That's, so the ones you were asking about, could we look? Well, there's a source of money as far as I see it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, just a few things. So I also reviewed applications. It was in a different category. It was in the citizen engagement category because I have no experience in science. But I would echo that, even in that category, the grants could have been better written. Maybe my expectation was higher, or maybe there was some miscommunication with what was the expectation, but I do agree with that comment. I also agree that a lot of the applicants should be talking to each other. In my particular category, there was many applications and programs that could have been made better had they partnered with other groups that were in their same community that were putting in applications for the same thing or similar projects. So I think as we move forward, that the applicants need to be talking to each other and looking at ways to partner, because combining and having a partnership is, in the long run, I think, beneficial for us. And then just to kind of touch on this group or this body, voting members reviewing applications. To me, it's no different than what happens in the United Way world and the nonprofit world, where you have board members that participate in the citizens review process, looking at those applications, making those site visits. And that's encouraged in that situation, because when it gets to the voting board, you want people that can give you information and participate in the conversation about why decisions were made and what was seen and what those conversations were, and it helps make your deliberations more robust because you're not doing them in a vacuum. And we do the same thing as elected officials on our TDC boards when we look at grant applications, or on our MPO boards when we make prioritizations. Those are also advisory boards to us as a full commission. And then we have to make those decisions. So I don't think I can understand the concern, but I believe that it makes that process better and stronger, and it gives you a better insight into how we ended up with the lists that we did. That being said, I do think that the process is important, and I agree that we need to always be looking to change the process and make the process better. But I don't think you should change the process midstream, because that pulls the rug out from under somebody whose expectations were that these were the rules and this was the process and the game we were going to play.
I want to thank you for your comments, each and every one of you. I'm as the chair, I'm having some trepidation in the conversation. Number one, we have only been an NEP for a short time. We've made it very clear we were going to do a review of our process, our procedures, and so on and so forth. And a common thread I'm hearing today is we're about ready for that time. And I talked about the workshop before, and this is a conversation that should happen at a workshop in which we can delve into much greater detail, back and forth, have management and each of the other committees at the table to have that give and take conversation. So that being said, and I'll make one comment about the individuals who may be reviewing those and sitting up here on this board. I think the good part that's coming out of this is that having been part of the review process and being able to provide this board with a eyes-on conversation as to this is what I've seen, this is what I think may need to be discussed going forward, and giving us the opportunity to say, okay, let's stop the process, let's workshop it, let's look at our policies and meld those policies to meet the needs and concerns of either the management board, each of the committees, or this board. So I think that's where that conversation has to occur. Trying to do this on the fly up here is not only difficult, it's arduous, it's almost impossible. And so we've had 528 comments, I believe was the scoring system. We put those people in place. And so if we're going to review that, we need to do that at a workshop, understanding we're going to create those policies. And each of us have our hand in that conversation on the policy changes. So that said, with the amount of eyes that have been on this thing, the process has been gone through, the scoring that's gone into this thing, I hear that process is an issue. The applications and the quality of the applications has to be understood by those who are applying, that they make better, or they're dumped. We don't even consider them if their applications aren't meeting the minimum requirements or greater. So that is something this board needs to discuss in a workshop. But at this point, we have a plethora of projects, and the sooner they get started, the more we'll see results. And we also have the impetus of EPA wanting to have this program implemented. So I'm going to ask you to support the staff's recommendation and motion to accept the management board recommendation for the final list, and to accept the management board. Do I have to have two separate motions? Okay, so the first one is to accept the management board recommendation to approve the final ranked list of proposals. Is there a motion?
For all of the proposals?
On the ones
On the restoration?
Correct.
I think Doug
On the
already made that.
restoration, there's already a
Yeah,
motion.
that's right. We had a, thank you, and we had a second. That's how long ago this has been. All right, so there's a motion and a second on the table. Any additional?
Point of clarification.
Thank you.
Does that mean, with Mr. DeFreeze, his comments, that he's going to go back to review these contracts?
I think what I've heard is what we did last year, when there was leftover monies, or monies that were unused, the board had the opportunity to review other projects that were in queue and make that approval to fund them at that point when the monies were allocated or located.
And that's
Is that
correct,
right?
and we'll bring that back to you July meeting.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So there's a motion and a second on the table. Should we do a roll call?
Wouldn't hurt.
All right, get a roll call vote, please. Call the roll.
And we're looking at the
Just a restoration.
project.
Just restoration.
That's what we're
Yep.
looking at.
It's RFP 2018-01 Restoration Projects Proposal Scores Funding.
So this is the first motion to accept. Mr. Bornick?
Yes.
Mrs. Adams?
Yes.
Ms. Denny's?
Yes.
Commissioner Zadowski?
Yes.
Mr. Fielding? Mr. Smith? And Ms. Lamartine?
Yes.
Thank you. Next item is a motion to accept the management board recommendations to fund the top 8 proposals contingent and consistent with the budget authority, and authorize staff to negotiate and enter into the contracts with those applicants. Is there a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion?
Second.
Motion is second.
Sort of did that.
Well,
Yeah, I think I got a double header up there early.
Well, I was
okay.
advised
We'll
by
be clear.
legal
We'll do it
that.
again. It's all right.
I'll do it again.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. You guys are making me make my dollar tonight. Oh, that's right, there is no dollar. Never mind.
Wait till the workshop.
Okay, moving right along. 8B, this is new business item BRFP 2018-02, Science and Innovative Technology Projects. Frank, do you want to?
Thank you. We
introduce
had
this?
25 projects proposed under this RFP. The 4 top-ranked projects are being recommended for funding. The total of those projects in cost is $618,197, and the council is contributing $408,000 to those projects. The top 4, as provided in the advanced package and listed on the screen in front of you, are noted. Next are the projects that ranked high enough for funding consideration, but for which funds were not available in this budget cycle yet. And then a list of the further projects that came in below in their ranking for funding consideration. So at this time, we would ask for a motion to accept the management board recommendation and approve the final ranked list of proposals.
One moment, please. Commissioner Fielding.
Please, 2 things. One, I don't know how we sort of slipped, and that's my perspective on it, the match requirements, because everything we had always, that I'm aware of, we'd always talked about at least 50%. So that's just what I'm aware of. We've got two projects in here that I think we could not fund and use those monies back in the restoration. And those would be the University of Central Florida Shoreline Restoration Suitability Model. As we've already discussed, there are several sources of that kind of information that's already available. What we need to do is implement. Doing the modeling is not where we are. We're already past the modeling. We need the implementation. The microplastics is a worldwide study that's been ongoing. I don't know. It's a significant problem, but what University of Central Florida needs to do is come up with one project, put their money together for one project. We need to use some of their money for the restoration projects. That's how I see it. So my motion would be that we request that.
Can I ask you a question? You raised the match. I see in the cost share match, 70,000, 41,000, 36,000, 62,000. What did we miss on having the match? I know it's not 50%, but there is a percentage of match. And that was taken into consideration by the Science Committee to determine whether the value of the project was suitable.
Historically, match for restoration projects has been 50%, match for science technology has been 25%, and match for citizen engagement has been 25%.
So that has been the history of the...
Yes.
I'm just not familiar with that. I don't remember that. And so if we're talking history, we're talking one time maybe. We're not talking about any...
Add it to the workshop, Dr. DeFries.
I'm making a list of recommendations, and when we get to that point, but I do want to say that we went through those parameters with board previously, and so we have no objection to bring them up, and I think bringing them up changes the way people respond. So I think I have 10 recommendations already, so we've got a lot to talk about.
Okay, I move that we accept the science and innovation technology for that top projects, but not that we delete the Central Florida Shoreline Restoration Project, and that they combine their monies with their microplastic, so that we reduce Central Florida to one project for them to bring the 77,000 or 78,000 with their microplastic project. We use that 117 that we were going to put to go back to the restoration.
Commissioner Fielding has a motion. Is there a second to support it?
I'll second it for discussion,
For
yes.
discussion? Kathy Laura Martina, you had a weigh in?
Yeah, as far as the match goes, I mean, I do recall them coming to us with all of this information. And I had talked to Frank before. My concern with the universities is their overhead. And so Frank said that they do have a cap, correct? Is there a cap on the overhead right now?
We did not imply a cap in the RFP, and it gets a little dicey. If, as is the case with these science and technology projects, these are being funded with EPA funds, federal grant funds, if the university has a negotiated indirect cost rate with any federal agency, then that negotiated cost rate is used in any of their applications for federal funds. So in the case of a UCF or an FIT or a UF with a negotiated indirect cost rate, they are eligible, and we are not allowed to restrict their indirect cost rate when applying for these grant funds.
Okay, and these are all federal funds?
These are all federally funded, yes.
Okay.
And you didn't get into the nitty-gritty of it, and so what that means, if you give $100,000 to one of these groups, Actually, the guys that are going to do the work may get $42,000, and the $58,000 goes to the university that goes, or whomever, so it goes back into their overhead, which that's not what we're up for. That's not, so I'm not, let them combine and just bring their own money, and we'll save that 117 to go into the restoration project.
Ms. Yancey?
Just by way of background, I want to kind of make sure we've set the stage for what the actual decision process is today and after today. We're in the midst of a procurement process that has certain legal pitfalls and challenges. We have procurement policies that the board adopted, and we can certainly change those at any time. We went through an arduous process when you were first formed, talking about things like procurement and personnel policies, and certainly they may be ripe for a review, given that we've now gone through our second cycle of procurement. They guide this process. The other thing that guides this process is the RFP that went out on the street, which is the procurement document. That document is what set forth the criteria, the weighting, the process that has been followed by staff and by the committees to get to the point where you are today. So what I would recommend, and I think we've got that we're going to go forward and have this workshop or conversation about how we change essentially that RFP for next year when it goes out on the street, because certainly all of the issues you've described and the concerns I've heard raised, we have ways we can nail that down in a future RFP, in a future procurement process. The problem we find is 72 hours after today, when this gets posted as a final decision of this board, it's open for legal challenge. And I would just caution you on following the process that has been laid out in the procurement document that folks have responded to, because to the degree we act in any arbitrary way or act outside of the criteria or act outside of the parameters of that RFP that has legally dictated this procurement, we have some exposure. So I will fully defend that exposure to the degree it ever materializes, and I will deal with that if it ever happens. But my goal at this point is to caution you on things that might increase that risk. And to the degree that you go outside of the criteria and outside of the ranking that's now gone through both the RFP process, the committee process, and the management board process, and is presented to you by pulling one out, you should have a clear and convincing and articulate on the record legal reason why we would do that. And I would just leave it at that.
Commissioner Fielding, you have a comment?
I hear the drift of where that discussion, and I think probably the essence of the underlying problem is there was obviously a misunderstanding by staff or legal from the very get-go, because we're not saying to anybody, hey, council has money that we're going to grant. And so we have devised this specific 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you jump every one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, you are entitled to money. And if that's what's being conveyed, that certainly is not anything that I had any intention to be conveyed. It was, in fact, I can remember almost word for word the conversation. I don't know how it got interpreted, but I can pretty much remember the conversation. And the conversation was, what it came about is what we want to do is have projects that will help us in the council do a better job in developing restoration for the lagoon. And so we want to guide people in what kinds of projects we want them to do. That certainly did not mean to me that if you over here in the corner decided that that meant I'm going to do this project, therefore you have to fund me, then I think this thing totally got off into some legalistic kind of string ball that just doesn't reflect the reality of what the board was trying to accomplish. So if developing a shoreline restoration suitability model is not a useful tool for us because we already have that, then for us to say, well, no, we're not going to fund that, and then for there to be, well, we'll sue you if you don't fund us. I find, okay, well, sue us. I mean, I don't find that to be an acceptable legal stance at all.
Thank you. Am I looking also at the shoreline, the most recent one the commissioner spoke about, phase 2? So there was a phase 1, so this is a follow-up to phase 1. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes.
All right. I'm not going to be supporting the motion simply because we created the process, we created the policy, and if there is a need for change, and if there was a misinterpretation, Commissioner Fielding, we need to take that under advisement and have a discussion about policy, procedure, and procurement specifically, and the other list of 9 or 15 other things that we have. I really get uncomfortable making policy on the fly from the dais. I'm even more uncomfortable today with, we've sent our committees to review scores, if not hundreds, of proposals with a great deal of deliberation, and to send a message back the other direction that we, if we do or we don't support the people we put on those boards, I don't want to send that message, and I'd rather have a conversation in a workshop discussing the elements, policies, procedures of what the NEP is, and how we move things forward. So I will not be supporting this motion, but we'll go ahead and call the vote unless there's any change in the motioner or the seconder.
Withdraw the second.
So we have withdraw the second. Is there a second to the motion? Hearing no second to the motion dies. Is there another motion?
Motion to accept staff recommendation.
So we have a motion and a and that is to accept the management board recommendation for approval of final ranked list of proposals. Is that accurate? All right. Any comments or questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We have a nay. Commissioner Fielding. Next request from staff is a motion to accept the management board recommendation to fund the top 4 proposals contingent and consistent with the budget authority and the authorized staff to negotiate and enter into contracts with those applicants. Is there a motion? We have a motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay from Commissioner Fielding. Thank you. Moving on to 9C. This is a new business item, RFP 2018-03, Citizen Engagement Projects, proposal, score, funding, and recommendation, and the requested actions. Frank.
Thank you. In our RFP 2018-3 Citizen Engagement, we had 15 projects that were proposed. We're recommending, the management board is recommending to fund the 3 top-ranked projects. The total of those projects in funding is $212,000, and the council contribution is $72,777. Provided in the advanced agenda package, and on the screen in front of you is a list of the top 3 applicants, and then the beginning list of applicants who scored high enough for funding, but did not go deep enough in the funding.
Move to accept.
We have a motion to accept. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Is there a motion to accept the management board recommendation to fund the top 3? We have a motion. Is there a motion and a second? Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Next item is 9D. Back to you, Frank. You're busy today.
We had 2 projects that responded to our 2018-04 RFP for Resilient Coastal Communities Planning Project. The top-ranked applicant is listed on the screen in front of you and in the advanced agenda package. The management board recommended approval of the final ranked list, and we would ask for that motion.
Go back to that page, please. Oops, it's okay.
There you
I
go.
got it.
There you go.
It's all right, thanks.
Okay, any comments or questions All right, we have management board recommendation, staff recommendation to accept the management board recommendation to approve the final ranked list. Is there a motion? We have a motion. Is there a second? Motion is second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. All accepted. Motion to accept the management board recommendations to fund the
So
top rank.
moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Motion is second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. All right, next item is 9E. Sorry.
Ready? Thank you. And if I could just make a quick comment on the RFP process from a staff point of view. If you remember, the first round of RFPs and funding that this council addressed was an architect or an artifact from St. John's. So we took a look at that, and then we did our first RFP as a body, and then we made 14 recommendations based on that RFP. So this is our second time doing this, and we see a whole bunch of process and policy changes that will come out of this. So the continuous evolution of our procurement and how we move this plan and this program forward is, from my point of view, very encouraging. And the dialogue that we have today and in the management board and the FAC have been very helpful and will continue to be helpful to us. So it's greatly encouraging. Just wanted to share that with you. Based on the recommendation to the Finance Advisory Committee, which is the draft fiscal year 18-19 budget that is presented to you today. The Finance Advisory Committee sat down and took a look at this budget and had discussion and deliberation on it. Their recommendation out to the management board was that they reviewed this and that they recommend the management board take this budget to you for your review and approval. So this has been through the Finance Advisory Committee, and this has been through the Management Board. It is now today in front of you for approval because under Florida law, it's required to be submitted. We have the tentative fiscal year 18-19 budget that you reviewed and approved at your last meeting, and now this is the first budget that will begin on October 1st. And if you'll allow me, I'll start with the revenue section and then move into the expenditures and then move into the operational costs. Before I get started, are there any general questions that I could answer for the board?
Questions from the board?
Okay.
Thank you.
If you'll take a look at the screen and in your packet, the revenue section, we anticipate our federal revenues at $600,000, which is a drop from the $677,000 from fiscal year 17-18. In fact, we had gone after supplemental grant funds in 17-18 and were approved. So that shows the difference between the 600 and the 677. We anticipate our license plate funds will be about similar, so we project at 125,000. We receive funds twice a year from the St. John's Water Management District pursuant to a revenue transfer agreement we have with them to spend license plate funds that are available for Volusia, Brevard, and Indian River County. The next section of revenues are the management contribution funds, which we expect, based on our interlocal agreement, to remain constant and the same from year to year. So our total anticipated revenues in fiscal year 18-19 are about $2.2 million. As we move into our expenditures category, I'm going to start with our fiscal year 18-19 EPA-funded business plan. And we break these down into these different categories to help you identify where these funds are going and to also help us identify what projects we need to submit to EPA for our annual business plan. And this is a timely issue for us because, as noted earlier, we need to apply to EPA for our business plan prior to June 1. So we make sure that we get these items in here. So our EPA work plan projects total $600,000. As we move down into the license plate projects have strings attached to them in that they can only be used for restoration and education. and restoration has to be at least 80% of those funds. What we've done as a council and what you've directed us to do is to take those license plate funds and use them in restoration, so that there's no question that 100% of these funds are going into restoration projects. So we've identified in the license plate area which county those funds are going to and the projects that they're going to be associated with. Next, we have the member contribution funded projects. This lists all the projects for which funding comes from those member contributions, whether it be FDEP, water management districts, and the counties. Next, we get into what I call the operational side of the equation, which is most of the in-house costs that are associated with running the day-to-day operations of the council. And we'll go through these because I'd like to point out that in the salaries and benefits from 17-18 to 18-19, we've kept that the same. There's no change. From the facilities expenses from budget at 17-18 to 18-19, again, there is no change. In the administrative cost section, once again, we run those flat across. In the administrative services section, I'd like to point out that we're continuing to see a decline in the use of legal services, and that's for two reasons. Primary driver of that reduction in costs is the reduction from bi-monthly to quarterly meetings. Our attorney is required to be at these meetings, and that involves a cost. Additionally, as we become more comfortable with the questions and answers that we go to council for, those questions and answers help us reduce our need to talk to council about steps that we take in operations as we move forward. So that's comforting to us, and unless something else happens that would require the increased use of legal services that we don't anticipate at this time, that number should stay low.
I'd like to point out, and I do know this, that you actually spend a lot of time on our contracts and things before it goes to legal. So I think that needs to be pointed out, that the work you do is very helpful to Ms. Ansay.
Yeah, I mean, I would be remiss if I did not, for the record, note that of all the clients I have, the professional legal advice that you get from me is preceded by, I mean, Frank does 90% of the contracts. I mean, he writes contracts better than most of the lawyers in my law firm. I mean, to be really honest with you. So by the time I get them, they're in great shape. And sometimes we have issues with the folks we're contracting with where they want to change provisions, and I've got to get into why they need to indemnify us, and I get dragged into those types of conversations. But he does the bulk of the heavy lifting and should be recognized for that because he saves a ton of money for the organization.
I'd like to embarrass him too. But no, I appreciate your effort because it does take a lot, and we're all very grateful.
We have really good legal counsel to help get me to this point, so I'm very happy about that. So in the wrap-up of the budget, I would also like to point out that if you look down to the second to the last line, it says fund balance beginning of year, and that 146,015. Those are funds that sit out there in what we've called the unplanned contingency fund. And we found those fees after our first fiscal year in 15-16, and we parked those monies up in the projects for the potential use in a future time. That's different than the 50 or so thousand that we have as a straight reserve, you know, a rainy day fund. So what we've done is we've taken that 146,015 and we've moved it over to the fiscal year 18-19, and we're going to help bolster the project's expenditures in that. If we had not done that, then the RFP projects that you would be looking at would be reduced by that amount. So we are taking into account your directive to us to try to find funds wherever they may exist and move them over as soon as we possibly can. And still, while being conservative and holding on to a reserve, we were able, and we think it's prudent, to take those funds and go ahead and move them into the next fiscal year.
And as part of that too, I think that, you know, we've seen fast forwarding even in the same budget year, the board can discuss, determine, and approve moving projects up that are in the list, been highly rated, but that's an agenda item the board can consider in the future.
Yes, and I just want to bring to your attention that we're currently ongoing with our financial audit, and If you recall last year, it was during that financial audit that we were able to clearly identify where additional funds, which were unspent in operations and for projects which came in underfunded, so that we could roll those forward. And we do anticipate, once we're clear of our current audit, bringing back an opportunity for additional funds in July to this board. So the totality is that in the current draft budget in front of you, we anticipate that we will see expenditures of about $2,371,015 in fiscal year 18-19. And with that, I remain available for any questions the board may have.
Okay. Any questions of Frank? No. I'm seeing that need to ask for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the budget, please come forward. Seeing no movement, come back to the board. Is there a motion? We have a motion to accept staff recommendation. Is there a second? Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's just very important to thank staff for bringing such a constrained budget to the council yet again. It's just a great, thank you for all that you do. And going forward with costs increasing everywhere else, I don't know about the rest of you council members, but all of our costs are going up. And for this to bring our admin down is a huge step. And thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you.
Well stated, and thank you for doing so.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is 9F. This will be presented by Dr. DeFries.
This is kind of the wrap-up. So we take your previous actions in this budget and roll it into our comprehensive business plan. And I wanted to just show you quickly that last year we had 10 items. A number of them we have completed, including that performance evaluation. The 7 priority items that you see here in this list are really all rollovers. So we're not expanding the amount of work we're doing. We're staying in our lane. And so we're going to continue, first and foremost, to implement projects, get the CCMP revision done, and then we have commitments and obligations with EPA based on their program evaluation to, look at monitoring, look at habitat restoration, look at the financial, and so those are all that we've talked about before. And so we'll continue to move those as strategic priorities. Next slide. And so I just wanted to showcase the remaining items that you haven't already discussed. So we put 2 kind of placeholders in this business plan, and we will come back to you in July with this, whatever squeeze we can make on dollars, whatever our post-audit cash carry forward might be, and these 2 items, one a monitoring plan and one a habitat restoration plan. My promise to you is that we'll do projects first before we do some of our internal. So that $50,000 is not currently in our budget, has not been identified. We were looking for additional dollars from EPA on a supplemental for $25,000. We found out yesterday that we did not receive those supplemental funds. And so we have our capacity building contracts still underway next year, CCMP technical support from Tetra Tech in this next budget, and it's reduced, but we want to make sure we have significant, support to finish that job in our next fiscal year. Small grants program was reduced from $100,000 to $50,000 in order to fund some additional citizen engagement over in the RFP. And we feel that's sufficient for this year because that's kind of moving a little slower. So we still have $100,000 in that pool of money this fiscal year. Our ideas contract is underway, and we're going to have some completion on that. So we have that in the budget. And then we have, as we do every year, monies to support conferences, summits, workshops. And so that would complete the programmatic side of the budget that you just passed. And so we'll bring this business plan back with whatever revisions in July for revisions and adoption. And so we have 2 motions on this. The first, Kathy, is to approve the business plan for 18-19 and then authorize staff to negotiate and enter into contracts that are identified in the plan contingent with and consistent with budget authority. Anything new we would, bring back obviously to you in advance of that action.
Thank you. Let me ask the board if there are any questions. I see no questions. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve the IRL NEP business plan for fiscal year 2018-2019. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Is there a motion to authorize staff to submit the 2018-19 EPA work plan proposal on or before June 1st EPA deadline? We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Mr. Chair, just one point of information. The appropriation decision and budget up in federal government actually has set aside some additional dollars from the EPA for local cost share. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but hopefully, maybe by July, if we get some guidance from EPA, we'll be able to come back and see how that's going to roll through EPA to NEPs and partners. And so there may be some additional dollars on the federal side once we see how that administration goes.
We have a friend in EPA who'll help us. Thank you.
And then just as a reminder, you have an additional item, 9G, which is appointment to management board of Jennifer DeMeo, who would be, on that board advisory. And legal counsel reminded me, Jennifer, to remind you that once you are on that board, you would be under sunshine with those members, but you work directly with us, so I don't think that's an issue for you, but let us know if that becomes an issue. And then Jim Sullivan from Harbor Branch would be the new appointment from the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution and FAU, replacing Megan Davis. And I would just like to go on record to thank Megan for strong support and active involvement in the management board, and she will continue to serve us as a scientist. So we will need board approval of those two new appointments.
Is there a motion to accept Jennifer Jim Sullivan to the board? I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
As far as appointments, we will contact each of you directly. We have a number of vacancies, I think, coming up. We have some people who have indicated maybe we've worked them too hard, but I also want to at least suggest to each of you, I'd like to see us almost double the Citizen Advisory Committee. We have about 4 or 5 per county, and I think we could bring that to a little more robust. So we'll get with each of you, and hopefully we can fulfill whatever changes we need in our appointments by that July time frame, because it'll be important to have full-seated committees for the CCMP review. So we'll get to you individually on that.
And I wanted to ask my colleagues, is anyone having any difficulty with the time and distance travel for some of your appointees? Because I'm hearing that back my direction from my folks in St. Lucie County. Yeah.
Well, just to know, as far as the management board goes, I know that Bob, if he's still here, he wanted to try to move that around just to help facilitate that for folks. So
I just wanted to see what everybody else was dealing with, because I've really been challenged with getting folks to stay on the board or come in because of time and distance commitments. So just wanted to raise that. I can work on that with you.
If I might make a suggestion, if we're going to workshop this, the RFP, and I'm going to just throw this out for your consideration, I think you really ought to have that discussion after you get a glimpse of the CCMP draft, because that CCMP may very well change the way we perceive RFPs, especially in the science and technology and outreach side, from reactive to proactive in a different way. So if we look at that August framework, I think maybe we should talk about the meeting schedule in that workshop as well, because we're in quarterly meetings. There's no reason why we couldn't go to rotational meetings quarterly, back to back with management board, maybe put them, and I know at least a couple commissioners are having trouble with Tuesdays. And if we did it back to back, maybe we could do a field trip similar to the water management districts, where you all can kind of see a couple projects in the ground and You know, I know the northern partners probably haven't seen what's going on in Lake O, and, you know, many of you may not have seen the Mosquito Lagoon up front and close. So if you're willing, we could go ahead and agenda that for the workshop, and we'll get together with you individually to make sure we have a date that works. But I'm thinking maybe in that, after our July meeting, maybe in August, although August, a lot of times it's vacation time, but even September wouldn't be too late to plan for the 18-19 fiscal year. So August, September?
So is there a consensus to at least investigate the process? Okay, so you have investigated, talk to us offline and
Okay.
see what our schedules look like. So,
Fantastic.
okay.
That's all I have.
Right. Next item is number 10, financial statements, quarterly reports.
No motion there, it's information only.
Okay. All right, and Dr. DeFries.
I'm going to be really brief on this. I only have two things I want to share. As many of you probably know, we have been in discussion with FDOT on the 528, State Road 528 expansion. They want to 6-lane it. I've worked directly with Port Canaveral for most of this year, and we were hoping that DOT would move forward with doing some flow analyses. And that had not occurred, and so we made a decision to, if we weren't getting that data done there, we were going to do it ourselves. So Port Canaveral has extended $15,000 to us. We have added, consistent with procurement, $5,000, and we are in the progress of looking at 10 different flow scenarios to model, because this flushing study, and somebody said, Dwayne's got a new term. I hate the idea of flushing because it's not like flushing a toilet. This is an ocean-enhanced flow. And so they go together. So we are going to provide that information not only to our CCMP, because it'll have value, but also DOT once those models are done. But we only get one opportunity every 50 years to have this discussion. And we want to make sure it's advised by the very best science we can. And so that contract is underway, and I just wanted to make you aware that we provided a financial contribution to their $15,000 to make it happen.
I would only suggest, based on the history of all the inlets up and down the coast, is there's a significant cost associated with opening more openings. We're spending $6 million every 3 years for beach renourishment on one corner of the jetty. So there is, going back to my cause and effect statement, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So just that should be part of the conversation. Is if you're going to do that, if that's going to be a discussion, that cost has to be a consideration.
Definitely not a simple issue, and it is not a root cause solution to the nutrient and other pollutants that enter the system.
It doesn't always have to be an inlet. There are other ways.
Yes, and we've been working with, and you all saw the feasibility study from St. John's. We continue that discussion with both the engineers. And then Frank, did I have anything else? I think that's it for my report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council members' report. We'll start over here. Adam? Ben?
Well, Mr. Bartlett kind of took our great thunder here. Volusia County did indeed. We've been working the last 4 years on a water quality assurance plan with the Mosquito Lagoon. We had our first meeting in 2014 at the Ocean Center in Volusia County with all 16 cities, our water management districts, and other agencies, our collaborative partners. And out of that, we have come up with a reasonable assurance Mosquito Lagoon plan with our 3 cities, New Smyrna, Edgewater, and Oak Hill, and of course the county and our water management districts, and have submitted that to the DEP with 13 strategies to help reduce nutrients and the loads going into the lagoon. And it's been a, not everyone is in agreement like this, but it's a good start. It's not the complete answer, but it's certainly a good starting point, and Volusia County is very much encouraged to go forward with this project. Only 2 other things, and Mr. DeFries, I don't know if we've done this yet, but we've got 2 partners, Volusia, coming to the table to partner with us. Boston Whaler is going to sign on with us as our Marine Consultants Architects DME. So we have 2 new partners that I'll be bringing to the table for the council with funding too, and continue to work on that to bring funding for us. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
And I want to thank you for those introductions and urge each of you to continue to, find innovators and investors. I will be talking to a gentleman. I don't want to announce it yet because I want to get permissions first, but we have somebody who's already offered helicopter service in emergency situations to us to get aerial views. So we are building that network quite well. So, call me if you've got anybody who has interest.
Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, Dr. DeFries and I have had frequent conversations recently. Well, actually, we have frequent conversations all the time, but most recently they've been involving funding and our legislature. So he and I put something together that I want to cover here. Dr. DeFries gave an in-depth presentation to the Citizens Oversight Committee on March 16th with examples from other national estuaries who have been successful in restoring quality and habitats in their system, which is obviously our goal as well. It was clear they've all taken an aggressive and comprehensive approach to nutrient reduction, and obviously we need to do the same. But I'm disappointed that the Florida legislature did not even consider local cost share dollars that would have provided state funds to expand and expedite product implementation. And I'm particularly disappointed because when Brevard County was in the process of deciding whether we were going to support this, our tax, I attended many of those town hall meetings, and I mentioned the fact in every single one that if we pass this, the legislators and different organizations like DEP and EPA told me that we definitely would be encouraged and would receive matching funds because we were the ones that were stepping up and doing something, and we could be the model that they could point to that, see, they've done this, Brevard County's taxed themselves, and we're going to support them, and that would be an encouragement to the other counties to do the same. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen. I do want to thank Representative Gail Harrell and Senator Debbie Mayfield for submitting bills to secure recurring funding, but it's a shame that these bills weren't even heard in committee. I'm also thankful that we have the DEP funding again for our council going forward this year in 2019, and for continued federal funding for the National Estuary Program from Congress. And I know that our staff works extremely hard to secure annual appropriations. So moving ahead, Mr. Chair, I would like to propose 3 motions. Motion 1 would be, I would like the IRL Council to direct Dr. DeFries to work directly with Drew Bartlett, FDEP, and our state legislators to develop a policy position that will secure recurring state matching funds for local cost share restoration projects during the 2019 legislation. And the purpose behind that would be that obviously the end goal is that we could get matching funds, but that it would be a concerted effort, not just put all the burden on 1 or 2 legislators to get this done, but through our National Estuary Program and the other National Estuary Programs in the state, it would create more leverage is a better word than pressure. It would create more leverage going into the legislature, and I think that would be worthwhile. So that would be motion number 1.
Before you go on, I just want to ask a question, and first I want to say thank you. This is very well thought out, and I can see your passion in this one, and not that I don't see them in all of them, but let me ask Ms. Anseh, from a standpoint, from a motion, I think consensus would be good to direct staff. Because it wasn't an agenda item, would a motion be appropriate? I think we could find consensus in what has been presented thus far, but.
Either one is fine. I mean, we don't have a requirement that in order to make a motion, it has to be on the agenda.
Okay.
But either way, I think the direction is probably loud and clear from staff's perspective.
Commissioner Smith, continue. You had 2 more.
Sure.
Oh, you want to respond? I'm sorry, please. I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't a response, it was a question. So what are what are we trying? You've asked for continuing money for what?
For our programs, for if we raise monies, whether it be countywide or as a body, this body, we would get and be qualified for matching funds from the state. The state has, as all of us know, in 2014, the citizens passed Amendment 1, which yields an obscene amount of money each and every year that goes unused for its purpose. $700 to $800 million a year. And I think about 200 or 225 million of it is designated for the Everglades, and the other, Lake Apopka too is, and
It's actually 200 million total, 145 for Everglades restoration, 45 million for Florida Spring Sheds, 5 million for Lake Apopka.
okay, so that's roughly $400 to $600 million that goes unused.
Is that a motion?
That would be my first motion, yes.
Second.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second on the table. Any comments or questions?
Just a question, a little bit more. So, of course, we're interested in trying to get that specifically designated. And how, what are your thoughts about that? How are we, and yes, that's a fight, and they've got all kinds of uses for it that they claim are appropriate. So it's not as if it's accumulating somewhere.
Right.
So your motion is of interest, but tell me, please, what are your thoughts? So we want to say, okay, we want continuing funding for, and for monies that we raise. What is that? What?
Mr. Chair?
If I can go back, hold on a second. Because we made this a legislative ask. We wanted to go in and we supported a designated funding source for projects statewide.
That's correct. And so what I'd suggest on this is that I'll come back to you in July with some recommended language. I work both with Representative Harrell and Senator Mayfield. The language they had in their bills was exceptionally well thought out. It was broad, but it was still specific to, restoration. And so let me look at those bills, craft the position, bring it back to you for deliberation in our July meeting. And then we can have a discussion and make sure that it's consistent with council's recommendation. I like the fact we're doing this now early, because if I have your direction on, what you want to ask for, then early on in this session, plus it's an election year, I've got your blessing, to make whatever that request should be. So I'll craft it and bring it back to you all in July.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the table. Any additional questions?
And the motion would be implemented by just what the director has said? Is that what we're to understand?
We had that legislative position statement the last 2 years. I'm thinking something along those lines, but with more specificity. And, maybe between now and July, we can get a sense of where we stand legislatively. Leadership's going to shift. And so I'm having some conversations there. But this language would be specific to local cost share projects, for restoration, water quality improvements, very similar to the Harrell language.
And the reason that I'm trying to be specific, I don't want us to seem to just be, sure, we want money, and sure, we'll vote yes, we want money. And so that's not any really big whoop. What I want us to make sure is that when we say yes, we want money, and here's what's happening. Here's the outcome. Here's what we're proposing. Because I don't want us to become irrelevant in the considerations. And if we go and just say we want money, everybody wants money.
Well, I think the effect would be the complete opposite. I think it would make us more relevant, because I can tell you that Representative Harrell and Senator Mayfield were very disappointed that they didn't get the support that this should have gotten, number one. And number two, if we get the other national estuaries involved in the DEP, each of those estuaries have multiple counties that are involved. So strength in numbers, guys. If we get other counties involved with that, then we can bring, hopefully, their legislative folks to bear on this, and they can all move forward together.
And that goes to the reason why we had the 5-county collaborative to begin with. You know, it's in numbers, and we were ignored from the entire lagoon side. And Commissioner Fielding, you wanted to add in something?
Yeah, please. And certainly, Kurt, I'm not disagreeing. Hey, I mean, that's why we spent however many years we've spent to try to pull all this stuff together. But what I'm wanting us to do is to do it with meaning and with purpose, rather than just have a not just almost vacuous, we want money kind of thing. But we want money because here's what we're doing.
Well, and the purpose is that we've already, in the case of Brevard County, we've already stepped up and we've got a plan in place and we've got funding in place. And I would think as other counties move forward and do the same, there would be a specificity that we want money to match what we are doing locally. We want the state to help the local governments.
Commissioners, I appreciate this conversation. I think we've given clear direction, and there is a motion on the table to Dr. DeFries, and I think we can have additional conversation when that is brought back to us. That way we can have that specificity as indicated, and offline you could each have your conversation with Dr. DeFries as to what you might want to have as a consideration. So we have a motion and a second on the table. Go ahead and call the question. So all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Okay, and motion 2 would be, I would like the IRL Council to direct Dr. Freeze again to continue his work with our congressional delegation and with the Association of National Estuaries. This would be on a federal level with a goal to increase federal funding for the National Estuary Program to $1 million for NEP annually.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Fourth.
Comments and questions? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Can we ask for 2 and settle for 1?
That's a good negotiating ploy. Okay, motion 3. This motion 3 stems largely from the events Tuesday night at our board meeting. As I said, that we had an awful lot of emotion. So Brevard County citizens are angry about our brown water, and I live on the lagoon, and I wake up every morning and see the brown water. And as Dr. Freeze said, if the contamination was blue, maybe it wouldn't be so bad, but people equate fecal matter with brown and brown water, and so it makes it doubly worse. So it's an optics kind of thing. So many citizens want to know whether bringing ocean water into the lagoon is a proactive solution to the water quality program. We were briefed by St. Johns River Water Management feasibility study a number of meetings ago. I know this type of project would be too big for the NRI, for us, and too complex for our small staff to provide administration oversight. I also know that the direct involvement and possibly funding from Florida Department of Environmental Protection in St. John's will be essential for a project of this scope to move forward. FIT, Dr. Weaver, is he a doctor? 3 years ago, I sat down with him, and he's got an idea and a plan, and he told me then that he was going to do a computer study, but I don't know that he's done that yet. But it's for a proposal for a weir at the locks at Port Canaveral, and it would allow high tide water in, and of course it couldn't get back out because as tide went down. It wouldn't require pumping or anything. It would just be a big weir that would allow high tides to enter the lagoon. And over time, it would provide obviously flushing because it would have to enter more water. It would provide flushing. So my motion has 2 points. I would like to request this council to direct Dr. DeFries to take a point on this issue and move forward with any and all partners to develop a science-based plan. In other words, to push FIT to move forward on this. And I'm requesting Dr. DeFries update the IRL Council on progress by our next meeting in July. Is that a possibility? Do you think you can get any kind of updates and input from those folks by then?
I kind of saw this one coming a year ago, and I'm surprised it took this long to land in my lap. Yes, the answer is yes. But this is a tricky project, and it's tricky from a couple different directions. Number one, you got to get the location right. then you have to have the partners on board. And so we have been discussing this, every couple of months. Bob Musser's in the room from Port Canaveral. Bob and I probably discuss this weekly. There's a couple of places this may work, but it's not simple, and it's not going to be cheap, and there's some concerns that I have as a scientist. I think the symptomatic treatment, if it's done right, could be really good. In fact, Doug Bornick heard me address this at the governing board meeting at Tuesday just this week. And so, yes, I think we probably should own the coalition. It's going to take more than just FIT to do it, but we're going to need to bring the right parties to the table and be very, very cautious about moving forward, because this is my worry, and it's the big one. It's the one that keeps me up at night. It sounds so simple to add seawater, but when we start to add it in the condition that we have right at the moment between 528 and Pineda Causeway, my biggest worry is that we go from a brown tide, which is not toxic, to a dinoflagellate bloom, of something that might be toxic because we shift temperature, salinity, and TPTN, nitrogen and phosphorus ratios. And the two commissioners from St. Lucie and Martin kind of saw that happen in reverse with freshwater with the discharges from Lake O in 2016. So this is going to take some tight science. Yes, I can bring something back. I think probably this is so big that we probably should own it and make sure the science is good, and then decide once we see the science and the partnerships, is it worth investing the kind of money that we're talking about? Because at the feasibility study that we saw from St. John's, we were starting at about $5 million in CapEx.
And I'm not advocating that we do more inlets, because my concern is that we need to get information out there. Because there's always unintended consequences. A simple answer that, well, if we just introduce more seawater, that'll clean up the inlet. I can tell you, I spend a lot of time around Sebastian Inlet, and when that high tide comes in, it affects the water maybe a quarter to a half a mile in each direction. And then when it goes out, it's gone. So the idea of the weir, the water couldn't get back out. But my concern is what would be the unintended consequences, and Dr. DeFries told me a year or two ago that some of that algae will actually proliferate in more salinity. So we might be causing a bigger problem. But it is so often brought up by people that get emotional, like Tuesday night. Why don't we just, well, you can't just. So if we do a study and we can get some other people involved, maybe we can get some answers and lay some of these thoughts to rest, or if it looks promising, then maybe we can get it to move forward.
Commissioner Smith, would you be comfortable in just having the consensus of the board to have Dr. DeFries review all of what you've just put into a nice package and kind of bring back the pros and cons, and that way, because Army Corps of Engineers will be involved in whatever
No question.
that is. So that's an added element of government bureaucracy and process. So it might, getting an idea of what costs and all of which would be involved, permitting, the science, as you say, I would ask you to let him kind of take that back and come back to us with kind of an overview.
And I'm fine with that, whatever the board thinks. I can tell you, I've been to Army Corps of Engineers in Washington, D.C. and twice, and it's quite an experience. You talk about bureaucracy. When I was up there last time, I met with some of Trump's people, and they said that he's actively trying to find somebody else to lead the Army Corps of Engineers because he can't even get past these guys. The first time I met with them, it was to try and speed up permitting. And I walked into this room, and it was a big table, probably of 16 people sitting there, and then there were a whole bunch of people in seats all along, and they're all like this. I thought, whoa, this is a tough crowd. I'm not going to get far with these people, and I didn't. Yeah. But that's the whole idea behind my thought process. It's brought up so often at all these different meetings. And so if we had some definitive answers, whether it's a good idea, bad idea, or whatever, I think it would be purposeful. So
We'll do that for July.
Okay. Commissioner Fielding, comment?
Thanks. One of the original purposes why we came together as a county collaborative, and then we morphed into what we are now. But one of the original purposes was to pull together the support efforts of the counties, because we are the guys that are faced with the day-to-day kinds of problems. And generally, our staff would be the ones that are more interactive with those kind of problems. And what we saw is that maybe if we could position ourselves, all of us, so that we're looking at the IRL as a pilot project. Okay, you guys up in the north end of the state, you don't want to do that. And you don't want to, we want to just try it. So just let us try. So what I'm suggesting is that that might be the avenue, political avenue, that we say to all of those that support us is, let's just let, for whatever it is, there's several things that the state just does us harm, actually. They do us harm. But let's ask, let IRL be a pilot project, whether it's septic sewer or whether, whatever the particular, right now we've got vessels that are unattended that somehow accumulate a whole lot of sewage and other things, and then they break apart and they become part of our, that's your problem now. So we need to have, the IRL needs to come together and say, let us start trying to deal with some of these problems in perhaps individual, unique ways, and let's see if it works. The state, you don't have to do all of these things. Just let us try. So I'm suggesting that we come together as counties and talk about asking our representatives and our senators to sort of have IRL as a pilot project.
Commissioner Fielding, I think that there is a start to that. There is a Lagoon Caucus, is that correct,
Yeah.
Dr. DeFries? So
That's correct.
For the conversation and the impetus in which Commissioner Fielding is suggesting, that may be the place to start. And again, going back to our legislative ask and creating that legislative component, as you said, there's going to be a sea change up there with a number of positions going to and fro. And so having an education component is part of that, and educating the Lagoon Caucus, but also the remaining 400 plus or 100, the number of officials that are going to be up there, those that are new and those that have been in place for a couple of years. So, Commissioner Fielding, I think we have a start in that the Lagoon Caucus has been begun, and that I think provides Dr. DeFries an opportunity to raise the level of conversation with that group first.
Will do.
Okay. All right, that concludes council reports. I just would tell you that St. Lucie County, with each of its cities, has agreed to move forward with the half-cent sales tax referendum request. The Lagoon and the North Fork, as part of the language, are there. So along with that, we don't have the designated strictly for the Lagoon, but it's going to be multiple projects. We are in the process now of determining each city's focal points. The county clearly has identified drainage and roadways as part of a significant part of that. And I will share with you, and as part of the Paradise Park funding that came from IRL NEP, that project we believe will be finished. But it's going to have three components. It's going to have drainage, roads, and cleaning up the lagoon. So we're getting threefers with our ideas where those monies would go for. And so, there may be a time, Commissioner Smith, where I come to ask you for your support in coming and talking about your vision and how you were able to achieve such a monumental effort, because that half-cent sales tax or your sales tax with $320 million projected, maybe more, it will be completely instrumental in seeing a change. And so we're trying to have that conversation at St. Lucie County It's a half cent. It's not going to be the world. It's not going to be $300 million. It'll be about $15 million a year. It's not the panacea, but we are trying to convince and to suggest to our residents that there will be a benefit not only to roadways and drainage and infrastructure, but also the impacts to the lagoon. We know that the Fort Pierce Inlet is probably one of the last elements that still is in a higher end of condition, and it will likely be the seeding point for any recovery north and south, simply because of its location and the inlet. So from that standpoint, the county continues to move forward. Our projects continue to move forward. Wesley's Island continues to really proliferate and being a great project. There was a fundraising element just last week in which they raised $4,000 for new native plantings that they hope to be able to put a new canopy in. And it is a central focus of the turning basin in St. Lucie County, and it's a sight to behold. So if you haven't come on down by boat, see it from the bridge. But those are components that are very valuable to our community, as well as our oyster bed restoration programs that are very well attended from an education standpoint. So those are some of the things from my report from St. Lucie County.
Is that your November ballot you're putting it on?
Yes.
Are you getting to the OPAGA requirements?
We are going to be a test case, and we're having that conversation, and what she's talking about is the APAGA conversation is 60 days prior to putting out referendum, you have to have a baseline of information. But the challenge with that is the language is not focused, and you have to show cause and effect, you have to see return on investment, but how do you do that?
There's no implementation language, there's no funding.
So we are taking what we have as a baseline of information and projects and so on and so forth, focusing those details, and we'll be submitting them through, and how we're going to have that conversation back and forth to see how that unfolds. And I think really it's going to be those of us who are in the process first will be the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, learning and feeling the pain of change. So
this is a law that just passed, but the implementation date's July 1st. Yep. July 1st.
So that's a challenge, and again, it's unfortunate that some things that get created in each legislative year are passed down to us without all the information, or even the unfunded mandates, which I'm going to stay away from today, and preemption and the
home rule.
Degradation of home rule, but. And Google says so. We are adjourned. No, we aren't. Any staff?
Just before you adjourn quickly, Kathy, could I have the next picture? I just wanted to embarrass Doug for a second here, and also to say thank you. We received a $5,000 check this week from the Beach and Board Fest at Ron John's, who are now one of our innovators and investors. So I reached out to the other surfer in the room, and so we went and picked up a check, and I just wanted to make sure that we said thank you to Ron John. And I want to thank Doug for taking time to go picking up that check with me, so thanks, Doug.
Yeah, they deserve to help out, because I've spent at least that much money in my lifetime at that surf shop.
So next NEP council meeting, do we have that? I'm seeing a theme here, Friday the 13th and Friday the 13th, and you guys are worrying me. So, okay. If there's anything else we go to the order, we are adjourned.